Yo, what's up everyone? It's Fanfic Adventure, and today we're checking out, what if Naruto found the One Piece at age 10 and returned to Konoha as the richest emperor in history? Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Rift. The day Naruto Uzumaki fell out of the world started like every other terrible day in his life, with an empty stomach and someone else's laughter at his back. He'd tried the ramen stand first. Old man Tucci had given him a look, not a mean one, just the tired kind that said "not today, kid," and nodded toward the sign that 3 academy students had apparently convinced the village council to post near establishments along the main street. A neat little rectangle of painted wood. It didn't say "no Uzumakis," it didn't have to. The kanji for reservation only was enough when the person doing the reserving controlled who counted as a person worth reserving for. Naruto had stared at that sign for exactly 4 seconds before turning around and walking away. He didn't run. Running would have meant they won something. The academy had been worse. He'd shown up that morning with his homework actually done for once. He'd stayed up until the ink on his fingers dried, triple-checking the kanji strokes because Iruka-sensei had this way of looking at sloppy work like it personally disappointed him, and Naruto had decided weeks ago that he didn't want that look aimed his way ever again. He'd walked in, sat down, and waited for Iruka to call on him. Iruka had called on Sasuke instead. Then Sakura. Then Shino, who answered in a monotone that made 2 kids fall asleep. Then Kiba, who got the answer wrong and still got a good effort nod. Naruto had sat with his hand up until his shoulder ached. When class ended, Iruka had gathered papers without once looking his way. It wasn't malice. Naruto understood that now in the way that kids understand things that hurt too much to name directly. Iruka wasn't cruel. He just looked through Naruto sometimes, the way people look through foggy glass without thinking about what might be on the other side. Naruto had folded his homework into his jacket pocket and walked out. The laughter came from a cluster of older genin near the training posts, 3 of them, maybe 14, 15 years old, clearly between missions and bored enough to be stupid about it. One of them said something that Naruto caught only in pieces, something about demon brat and bet he can't even throw a kunai straight, and normally Naruto would have turned around and said something back, loud and sharp, because silence felt like losing. But today he was just tired. He walked past the village gate without really deciding to. The chunin on duty, a lean woman named Izumi who had gate rotation 3 times a week, opened her mouth, then closed it. Watched him go. Didn't stop him. Nobody stopped him, because stopping him would have required acknowledging he existed in a way that mattered. The forest beyond the gate was different. It always had been. The trees didn't care who his father was or what lived in his stomach. The wind moved the same way for him as it did for anyone else, and the dirt path that wound between the roots felt solid under his sandals in a way that the village street somehow never did. He found his spot, a clearing he'd claimed through sheer frequency of use, a wide flat space ringed by trees old enough that their roots had grown into rough bench-like formations along the edges. He'd been coming here for 2 years. There were kunai marks on 3 of the trunks where he practiced throwing until his arm gave out, and a divot in the earth near the center where he tended to land after attempting jumps he wasn't quite coordinated enough to stick. He dropped his jacket on a root and started throwing. The kunai hit the mark maybe half the time. The other half buried themselves in bark 6 inches off target, which was actually an improvement from last month, though Naruto wasn't inclined to feel good about it today. He threw and retrieved, the motion becoming rhythm, the rhythm becoming something close to blank. He was on his 40th throw when Kurama spoke. The Ninetales didn't speak often, not in words, not yet. Mostly it was sensation, a heat behind the ribs that meant anger, a low thrum that meant danger, a suffocating pressure that meant I'm still here and I hate you on principle. But sometimes, in the quiet, something closer to a voice bled through the seal. Less words and more the shape of them. Brat. Naruto paused mid-throw. What? The heat behind his ribs shifted. Less like anger, more like attention. Like Kurama was looking at something. What are you looking at? Naruto turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The clearing was exactly as it always was. Late afternoon light coming through the canopy in long diagonal bars. His jacket on the root. The divot in the center. 3 kunai-marked trunks. Except. In the center of the clearing, roughly where the divot was, the air looked wrong. Not wrong in a scary way, not immediately. More like the way heat shimmer looked above summer roads, a wobble, a soft distortion, the kind of thing the eye kept trying to correct for and couldn't. Naruto walked toward it slowly. It wasn't big. Maybe 2 feet across, hovering at chest height, and the edges of it had a quality he couldn't name, like looking at a word in a language you almost knew. It meant something. He could feel that much. He reached out and poked it with one finger. The world folded. That was the only way he ever described it afterward, not a door, not a fall, not a tunnel. The world just folded, the way a piece of paper folds along a crease that was always there, and Naruto was suddenly standing on the other side of that crease without any of the steps in between. He was also, very suddenly, standing in the ocean. Not near it. Not on a beach. In it, chest deep, salt water so cold it knocked the air from his lungs, and the wave that hit him half a second later knocked him completely under. He came up sputtering, spinning in place, trying to find something, anything, to fix his position on, and got a mouthful of spray for his trouble. The sky above him was wrong. The wrong shade of blue, too deep, too saturated, and the clouds moved in the kind of slow, heavy way that said this storm isn't done with you yet. The sun was somewhere behind all of it, a pale suggestion of light. The water around him was gray-green and moved in long, muscular swells that lifted him up and set him down with bored indifference. Okay, Naruto said to no one. He tread water in a messy, inefficient way that was more desperate arm motion than actual technique. Okay. Fine. He had no idea where he was. He had no idea where the rift was. He had no idea which direction was land. Kurama's presence behind his ribs shifted again, not panic, which surprised him, but something almost like curiosity. Like whatever this place was, it registered as different even to a 9-tailed demon fox who had existed since before the hidden villages were anything more than ambitious campfires. Interesting, the shape of Kurama said, or something close to it. I'm drowning, Naruto said. You're not drowning yet. I'm about to drown. The wave that hit him next was genuinely impressive. It picked him up, flipped him sideways, and would have driven him 10 feet under if his hands hadn't found something solid, rope. Thick, salt-stiff rope, the kind tied into a cargo net that hung off the side of a ship he hadn't even seen approaching because the swell had been between them. He grabbed it with both hands and held on with the specific determination of someone who absolutely refused to let this be how he died. The ship was enormous. He registered that in pieces as he dangled off the side of it, the sheer red-painted hull, the black flags snapping overhead, the warm yellow light from the portholes. Someone above him shouted something in a dialect he almost understood, and then 2 very large hands reached over the railing, grabbed him by the collar, and hauled him up and over onto the deck with the casual ease of lifting a wet cat. Naruto landed on his back on salt-scrubbed wood planks and stared up at the storming sky and the face of a man who was, objectively, the most ridiculous-looking adult he'd ever seen. Red hair. Not just red, the specific shade of red that suggested the person wearing it had never once in their life been told what to do by anyone and had liked it that way. An open vest over a bare chest decorated with scars that told stories, a straw hat hanging around his neck by a cord, and a grin wide enough that the scar under his left eye crinkled into a curved line. Ha, the man said. The sea spit one up. Beckman, the sea spit one up, he called over his shoulder, still grinning. A taller man materialized from somewhere portside, cigarette canted at an angle in his mouth, expression suggesting he had retired from being surprised by anything approximately 4 years ago. He looked at Naruto, looked at the ocean, looked back at the man with the red hair. "It's a child, Shanks," he said, in the tone of someone reading a very boring incident report. "It's a kid," Shanks said, with markedly more enthusiasm. He crouched down to Naruto's level, hands on knees, still grinning. "You okay? Where'd you come from? We didn't see another ship." Naruto sat up slowly, water sheeting off him, and looked around the deck. A dozen crew members had gathered in a loose half-circle, the way people gathered around something they weren't sure was dangerous or just weird. They were a varied-looking group, big, small, scarred, tattooed, one woman in the back with a striped bandana who was openly laughing, a man near the mast who appeared to be napping standing up. He looked back at the red-haired man. "I fell through a hole in the air," Naruto said. Shanks blinked. Then the grin came back, bigger than before. "Yeah. What was on the other side of it?" "A forest. And before that a really bad day." Shanks sat down cross-legged on the deck like they were two kids on a playground and not a fully grown pirate captain and a soaking wet academy student who had just materialized from a dimensional anomaly. "Bad days and a forest. That tracks." He stuck out his hand. "Shanks." Naruto looked at the hand. Shook it. "Naruto Uzumaki." "Uzumaki." Shanks tilted his head. "That's a real old name. So people keep almost telling me." Naruto wrung water out of his jacket. "Where am I?" "East Blue. Roughly 3 days' sail from Logue Town, 2 days from the Reverse Mountain if you're headed for the Grand Line." Shanks watched him with the particular attention of someone who was significantly more perceptive than he looked. "You don't know what any of that means, do you?" "No." "Okay. Short version, you're on a sea, on a planet, in a world that is probably not your world based on the part where you said you fell through a hole in the air." Shanks stood, offered a hand, and pulled Naruto to his feet with zero effort. "Lucky-roo. Get the kid some food." From somewhere aft, a very round man's head appeared. "How much food?" Shanks looked at Naruto. "How hungry are you?" Naruto looked at Shanks. "I haven't eaten today." Shanks winced with genuine feeling. "All of the food, Lucky-roo." They fed him on the lower deck while the storm finished throwing its tantrum overhead. Naruto ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned not to assume the food would still be there if he looked away, and the crew watched with varying degrees of awe and amusement. The woman with the striped bandana, Yasop, he learned, though she corrected him twice that she went by the name and not the title, declared that she'd never seen a kid eat a whole roasted sea king leg by himself before, and Naruto said through a mouthful of meat that he didn't see what was so impressive about that, and she laughed so hard she knocked over her cup. Shanks sat across the table from him through all of it, one arm propped on the wood, watching with that same sharp underneath the easy quality that Naruto was starting to read as the man's natural state. "So," Shanks said, when Naruto came up for air between the third and fourth helpings. "Hole in the air. Different world. 10 years old." "Yeah. And your plan is?" Naruto chewed, swallowed, considered. "I don't have one yet." "Fair enough." Shanks drummed his fingers on the table. "Can you get back? Through the hole? I don't know how to find it again." Naruto said it plainly, without the wobble in his voice that the truth of it deserved. He was 10. He had just been deposited in an ocean in a world he didn't recognize with no money, no supplies, no chakra tools, and no idea how the rift had opened in the first place. By any reasonable metric, this was the part where he cried. "I'll figure it out eventually." Shanks studied him. "You're not scared?" "I'm a little scared," Naruto said honestly. "But being scared doesn't help figure things out." Beckman, who had been leaning against the far wall with his cigarette, made a small sound that might have been approval. Nobody acknowledged it. "Smart kid." Shanks reached across and refilled Naruto's cup from a jug. It was water, Naruto noted, not whatever the crew was drinking. The consideration was quiet and deliberate. "Where are you from?" "And I don't mean the forest." So Naruto told him. Not everything, not the thing in his stomach that everyone in the village walked around talking about in low voices, not the worst of the days or the empty apartment or the sign outside the ramen stand. But the shape of it, a hidden village, people with chakra, a world of shinobi and missions and politics wrapped in honorable-sounding language. Ninjutsu. The academy. A life that was supposed to become something. Shanks listened without interrupting, which was more than most adults managed. When Naruto finished, Shanks was quiet for a moment. Then, "You didn't mention anyone missing you." Naruto looked at his cup. "I didn't mention it because there isn't anyone." The silence that followed that was a different quality from the others. Not uncomfortable. More like the way air felt before rain, charged with something that hadn't landed yet. "Okay," Shanks said finally. "You can stay on the ship for now. Earn your keep, we'll teach you what we know, and when we figure out how to get you back, we'll figure it out together." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "But I want to be straight with you, Naruto. This world is not gentle. The sea doesn't care who you are or where you came from. Pirates don't either. The Marines less so. You're going to see things that'll change you." "I already have things in me that changed me," Naruto said. "I'm still here." Shanks looked at him for a long moment. Then the grin came back, slower this time, and real air. "Yeah. I think you are." He learned the ship in 3 days. Not the sailing, that took longer, but the shape of it, the way the crew moved around each other like a tide, each person occupying their lane without thinking about it. He learned that Yasop could hit a target at distances that didn't make sense. That Beckman read strategy books between cigarettes and never talked about what he took from them. That Luckuru, despite the impression given by his silhouette, could move faster than anyone on deck when he needed to. And he learned that Shanks, relaxed, laughing, reflexively generous Shanks, had a quality to him that Naruto could feel without being able to name. A gravity. When he walked to the bow and looked out at the ocean, the water seemed to recognize something. On the 4th day, Naruto was climbing the rigging when the storm came back for round 2, worse than the first, and the ship bucked hard enough to throw 2 crew members off their feet. Naruto held on, up in the rigging, rain sheeting sideways and the mast swaying in arcs that made his stomach lurch, and felt something shift behind his ribs. Not Kurama's heat. Something else. A kind of opening. Like a door cracked just enough for light to come through. He'd felt it in training before, faint and unreliable. Chakra moving in ways that the academy didn't teach, ways that bypassed the proper hand-seal channels and went somewhere more fundamental. The place where his chakra and Kurama's had the same walls. Up in the rigging, 30 feet off the deck, in a storm that was actively trying to kill him, Naruto closed his eyes and breathed the way he practiced in secret, the kind of breathing that wasn't about oxygen so much as about stillness, finding the still point inside the chaos. The chakra moved. Not much. A thin line of it, from somewhere deep behind his sternum, flowing out through his hands and into the rope. The rope stopped moving. Or rather, it moved with him instead of against him. Like it agreed with him about staying put. "Ha," Naruto said, to the storm, to Kurama, to no one in particular. "There you are," Kurama said. "Not in words. In feeling. The specific feeling of something enormous and old and complicated putting aside its grudge long enough to acknowledge something interesting." Shanks's crew spent 2 weeks with him before they made port at a small island called Gecko's Rest, a trading stop barely big enough to have a name, and it was there that things changed shape again. The island had a market, rough, loud, smelling of fish and rust and spices from somewhere south, and it had a problem. A local warlord, the kind that grew up in places where the Marines never came and decided that made them gods by default, had taken to taxing the traders hard enough that the smallest boats weren't coming anymore, and the islanders were starting to feel it. His name was Crag. He had 80 men and a ship with iron plating on the hull. He also, on the day Naruto arrived at Gecko's Rest, had the bad timing to walk into the market while Naruto was buying dried fish with money he'd earned helping unload cargo, and decide that the small blonde kid carrying a bag of food was funny enough to kick. It was the kind of casual cruelty that didn't even register as cruelty to the person doing it, the foot coming out, the bag going flying, fish scattering across the market floor, and Crag's men laughing because their boss was laughing. Naruto looked at the fish on the ground. Looked at Crag. "Pick it up," Crag said. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a jagged scar across his chin and the expression of someone who'd never been told no by anything that kept breathing afterward. "All of it. And then get out of my market." "Your market," Naruto said. "That's right." Naruto crouched and picked up the fish. Stacked them back in the bag with care. Tied the bag closed. Stood up. Looked at Crag again. "No," he said. Crag's expression did a very specific thing, the thing expressions do when they cycle through surprise, recalibration, and arrival at violence in about 2 seconds flat. His hand went to the club at his belt. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Naruto moved, not the elegant, codified movement of Academy Taijutsu, but something rawer and more instinctive, the kind that came from 2 years of training alone in a forest where the only feedback he got was "you're not there yet" from his own body. He caught Crag's wrist before the club cleared the belt loop, torqued it in a direction wrists preferred not to go, used the stumble that created to bring Crag's face down to meet his knee, and stepped back while Crag sat down heavily on the market floor with both hands over his nose. 8 of Crag's men drew weapons. And Shanks's crew materialized out of the market crowd with the synchronized ease of people who had done this enough times to be bored by it. Yasop was already sighting down a flintlock. Beckman had his hand on his sword hilt. Luckyru was eating something and watching with professional detachment. A dozen more behind them, and behind them, just at the market entrance, Shanks himself, hat on, hand not on his sword because he hadn't needed to put it there yet. "I'd let it go," Shanks said to Crag's men, pleasantly. They let it go. Afterward, sitting on the dock with his bag of fish and the particular internal quiet that came after adrenaline drained, Naruto felt Shanks sit down beside him. "You knew we'd be there," Shanks said. Naruto shrugged. "I figured. What if we hadn't been? Then I'd have dealt with 8 guys instead of 1. He said it without bravado, just math. He probably would have lost. But he also wouldn't have not done it, and those were 2 different things. Shanks looked at him sideways. "Yeah. You're not going to be a normal passenger, are you?" "Probably not." Shanks laughed, not the big performance laugh he used for the crew, but the real one, shorter and more genuine. "Good." They stayed at Gecko's Rest for 3 days, and on the second one, Naruto found the island. It was a small thing, a rocky outcrop accessible at low tide through a cave the locals called Drowned Man's Passage, which should have been warning enough, but Naruto had always had a specific relationship with warnings where they read more like suggestions. A fisherman's kid, maybe 9 years old, had mentioned it sideways in a conversation about tides, and the phrase she'd used was the growing place, and something about it caught in Naruto's head like a hook. He went alone, at low tide, with a lantern borrowed from the ship. The cave was exactly as unpleasant as advertised, low ceiling, ankle-deep water, smell of salt and old darkness, but it opened up after 40 meters into a chamber that wasn't natural. Too round. The walls too smooth. And in the center, rooted in a crack in the stone floor where somehow light got through from above, was a tree. It wasn't a big tree. It was maybe 10 feet tall, growing out of rock in a place that should have killed anything botanical, with dark bark and leaves that moved in air that had no detectable source. And hanging from 7 of its branches were 7 fruits. Each one was different. Different shapes, different colors, different textures. The patterning on them was unusual, swirling designs, like the kind carved into old stone, the kind Naruto had seen on the monument in Konoha without ever knowing what they meant. He stood there for a long time, lantern held up, looking at them. The heat behind his ribs was different here. Kurama wasn't alarmed. If anything, the sensation was the closest thing to reverence he'd ever felt from the fox. Which was alarming in its own way, because Kurama didn't do reverence. One of them, the shape of Kurama, said. Only one. Which one? Silence. Then, something that functioned like a direction. Not a point, more like a lean, the way a compass needle leaned. Toward a fruit on the highest branch. A fruit the color of deep forest shadow, shaped like a pine cone but rounder, with lighter swirling marks at its center. Naruto climbed the tree. It held him with the specific confidence of something that had been waiting. He held the fruit. It was heavy. It smelled like the forest outside Konoha, not like the sea, not like the cave, like home in the most complicated way that word had ever meant anything to him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he bit into it. It tasted terrible. Like someone had concentrated all the worst flavors that had ever existed and compressed them into a single piece of fruit, bitter and salt and something almost metallic, and the texture was all wrong, and Naruto's face did everything it possibly could without technically leaving his skull. He swallowed it anyway. All of it. Because Kurama had pointed, and Kurama had never in 2 years of involuntary cohabitation pointed at something that wasn't exactly what it said it was. The change was not immediate. He climbed back down the tree. He walked back through Drowned Man's Passage. He returned the lantern. That night, sleeping in his hammock in the crew quarters, the change came. It was not painful. It was more like expansion. The way a room feels when someone takes out a wall you didn't know was there. His chakra, already the most chaotic and prodigious thing the academy instructors had never known what to do with, found a new shape. Not a new container, the same container, but the container suddenly had another dimension. The fox's chakra and his own, always separate, always suspicious, found a new common language, not blended, but harmonized, the way two instruments playing different parts still make a single song. In the morning, Naruto sat up in his hammock and looked at his hands. He made a shadow clone without hand seals. Just thought it into being. The clone looked at him. He looked at the clone. Cool, they said simultaneously, and dispersed. From somewhere deep behind his ribs, Kurama made a sound. It took Naruto a moment to identify it, because he'd never heard it before. The Nine-Tails was laughing. Shanks found out about the fruit 2 days later, when Naruto accidentally shifted, just for a second, just his right hand, into something that wasn't quite human. The hand stayed the right size but the chakra coming off it was visible, a faint golden haze with something wilder at its edges, and Shanks, who was handing Naruto a coil of rope at the time, stopped and looked at it the way a man looked at a thing he recognized from somewhere deep and wordless. The sage form, Shanks said, quiet. Naruto blinked. You know about it? There are stories. Shanks set the rope down slowly. Very old stories. The kind that most people think are mythology. He paused. You ate the fruit in the cave. The fisherman's kid told you. She told Luckyroo. Luckyroo told everyone. Shanks looked at Naruto's hand, back to normal now, and something moved through his expression, not fear, not quite. Something more complicated. That fruit hasn't been touched in 300 years, Naruto. People have known it was there. Nobody took it. Why not? Shanks was quiet for a moment. Because the stories say it doesn't offer power. It offers potential. And potential is terrifying to most people, because it requires you to actually become something. Naruto looked at his hand. Flexed his fingers. The chakra, his and Kurama's together, hummed. Then most people are stupid, he said. Shanks looked at him. The grin came back, not the easy one, the real one. Yeah, he said. They kind of are. On the last morning at Gecko's Rest, Shanks and his crew prepared to sail south. Naruto stood on the dock with his bag, fish, a spare shirt Yasop had given him, a knife Beckman had pressed into his hand without comment the night before. Come with us, Shanks said. He wasn't pushing. He was offering, which was different. Until you figure out the way back. Naruto looked out at the ocean. The horizon was the color of hammered copper in the early light, and the water moved in long, slow swells like breathing. He thought about the rift. About the forest. About a homework assignment in his jacket pocket with his name on it in careful ink that nobody had asked to see. He thought about the fruit. About the expansion in his chest. About the laugh behind his ribs. I'll figure out the way back eventually, he said. But I'm not ready to go back yet. Shanks tilted his head. Why not? Naruto looked at him. Because I just got somewhere. A beat. Then Shanks stuck out his hand. Sail with us to Logue Town. After that, you'll have your sea legs and enough to go your own way. He paused. There's a fruit stand owner in Logue Town who lost a ship to a pirate 3 months ago. He can't afford a new one. You help him, he'll give you the ship. Naruto shook the hand. How am I supposed to help him? Shanks smiled. Figure it out. You're good at that. He was. He was very, very good at that. And the world, this vast and wild and salt-soaked world that didn't know his name yet, was about to find out. Chapter 2, The Grand Line Eats Children for Breakfast. The ship Naruto got in Logue Town was called the Tsubaki, which meant camellia, which was painted on her hull in chipped red letters by someone who had clearly been drunk when they did it. She was 40 feet long, single-masted, with a cabin that smelled permanently of old fish and a hull that had been patched in so many places the original wood was basically decorative. She had a dinghy with a hole in it and a compass that spun freely regardless of direction, which turned out to be less of a problem than it sounded because in the Grand Line compasses didn't point north anyway. The fruit stand owner's name was Kokoro. He was 63 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and had the permanent expression of a man who had been cheated by the universe so many times that he'd stopped taking it personally. The pirate who'd taken his ship, a medium-grade nobody named Ballast Pharaoh, had sailed east toward the calm belt with it, which everyone agreed was a death sentence for the ship if not for Pharaoh specifically. Naruto had found Pharaoh in 4 days. Not through any information network or strategic intelligence, he'd sailed east, run into a marine patrol heading west who complained loudly about a pirate they couldn't catch, taken a rough heading from their complaints, and found the stolen ship anchored in a cove behind a rock formation shaped vaguely like a thumb. Pharaoh had 30 men. He was also, it turned out, a devil fruit user, the Bane no Mi, Spring something, which let him compress his legs and launch himself at things at high velocity. He launched himself at Naruto from the deck of Kokoro's stolen ship, legs compressed into metal coils, which was genuinely impressive to watch. What he hadn't accounted for was that Naruto had been sparring with Shanks's crew for 2 weeks, including several sessions with a man called Rockstar who had the specific fighting style of someone who had survived being wrong about things many times and learned from each one. And he hadn't accounted for the chakra. And he definitely hadn't accounted for the fact that Naruto had spent the morning consolidating something new, a partial sage shift, just the arms, just enough to make his hands hit like sledgehammers. The fight lasted about 40 seconds. Pharaoh went into the ocean. His men, presented with a 10-year-old standing on their railing looking at them with the specific calm of someone deciding whether to continue, collectively decided to swim for the cove. Naruto sailed both ships back to Logue Town. Kokoro cried. Not quietly, the full production, face and hands, shoulders heaving, the specific weeping of someone who had stopped believing in good news and been ambushed by some. He gave Naruto the Tsubaki and 3 months of dried goods and 40,000 berries he'd been keeping under his floorboard for emergencies. Naruto had looked at the 40,000 berries. Then at the Tsubaki. Then at the ocean. Okay, he said. Where's the Grand Line? 2 years is a long time to be 10 years old in a world that doesn't hand you anything. By 12, Naruto had sailed into 6 islands that had tried to kill him through various combinations of hostile locals, toxic weather, marine pursuit, and 1 island where the ground itself was carnivorous. He'd come out of all 6 intact, which he attributed roughly equally to competence, karma, and a specific kind of stubbornness that wasn't quite courage and wasn't quite recklessness but sat in the space between them like a foundation. He'd also, through a series of events that started with helping a ship in distress and ended with him accidentally winning a card game against a weapons dealer, acquired 3 more crew members. The first was Mako, a 17-year-old navigation prodigy from a small island in North Blue who'd been sold to the weapons dealer to cover her family's debt and had been waiting with absolute cold patience for an opportunity. The opportunity had turned out to be Naruto, who'd won her contract in the card game and then immediately handed it to her and said he didn't believe people owned other people and she could go wherever she wanted. She'd considered that for about 3 seconds and then said she wanted to navigate his ship because it was clearly going somewhere interesting and she was bored of the weapons dealer's orbit. The second was Juro, a 22-year-old former Marine cook who deserted his post after being ordered to fire on an unarmed merchant vessel and had been drifting on a raft for 2 weeks when the Tsubaki found him. He cooked the way some people fought, with total commitment and structured fury, and every meal he made tasted like an argument he'd won. The third was Bell, who was 41, built like a door frame, and had been a shipwright for 20 years before the shipyard he worked in was bought out and gutted by a marine contractor. He'd wanted to punch someone important about it for 2 years and had been unable to find a candidate. He explained this to Naruto during the storm where they met. Bell's lifeboat had capsized, Naruto had fished him out, and Bell had immediately started fixing the Tsubaki's hull breach while still coughing up seawater, because his hands apparently worked independently of whether the rest of him was in crisis. The 4 of them were a small crew for the Grand Line. Naruto knew this and didn't particularly care. What he had instead of numbers was a system. Mako plotted routes that found the safe windows between killing weather. Juro kept them fed well enough that nobody's judgment went bad from hunger. Bell kept the ship from becoming a submarine. And Naruto handled everything else. Everything else, in the Grand Line, was a lot. The island where he met Nico Robin was called Sable Crux, and it was the kind of beautiful that existed specifically to lull people into forgetting it was dangerous. Black sand beaches. Water so clear you could see 20 feet down to the reef below. Trees that grew in long graceful arches over the coast, heavy with fruit. The market town in the interior smelled like baking bread and salt air, and the people moved with the relaxed ease of somewhere that hadn't had real trouble in a while. Naruto came to Sable Crux for water and food resupply, which Mako had calculated they needed before the next island segment. He wasn't looking for anything else. He found Robin because she found trouble first, and he walked into the edge of it. He heard it before he saw it, not shouting, not a fight, but the specific quality of a conversation being conducted through threat rather than negotiation. 3 men in Baroque Works agent coats, he knew the coats by now, the kind of operational fashion choice that told you everything about the organization's relationship with subtlety, had a woman cornered in the alley beside the bread baker's stall. The woman didn't look cornered. That was the first thing he noticed. She was standing with her back to the alley wall, arms at her sides, reading a book. Not pretending to read a book, actually reading it, with the focused attention of someone who found the current pages more interesting than the people who wanted to kill her. She was maybe 26, 27. Dark hair. Eyes that had the same quality Shanks's had, the depth of someone who had seen more than their face suggested. She was thin in the way that meant she'd been on the run for a while, eating when she could, sleeping when she could, burning everything spared just staying ahead of things. Last chance, one of the Baroque Works men said. He had a serrated sword. The other 2 had crossbows. Come with us or we take you in pieces. The woman turned a page. I heard you the first time. Then why? Because, she said, closing the book with a soft, definitive sound, I'm deciding whether what comes next is worth interrupting my reading. She looked up. Her eyes went past the 3 agents, past the alley entrance, and found Naruto, who was standing at the alley mouth with his hands in his pockets watching the whole thing. He wasn't sure what she saw when she looked at him. A 12-year-old in a bright orange jacket, probably. Small for his age, he'd been eating well for 2 years but the first decade had done its work. Blonde hair that went in every direction without apology. Whisker marks on his cheeks that people in the Grand Line found variously intriguing and alarming. She looked at him for about 2 seconds, then looked back at her book. He tilted his head. She wasn't asking for help. She also wasn't about to get out of this alone without making things very loud and probably bringing more agents, because this was clearly the kind of extraction situation where the backup call had already been made. Naruto looked at the 3 agents. Looked at the woman. Thought about it for maybe half a second. Then he walked in. "Hey," he said to the agents. "Is there a problem?" The one with the serrated sword turned. Looked at him. Did the thing people did when they saw his size and age, the quick recalibration, the dismissal. "Get out of here, kid. This doesn't involve you." "She's reading," Naruto said. "You're bothering her." "That involves me." "Does it?" The agent's voice had moved past dismissal into the tone people used right before they tried to remove an obstacle. "And why is that, exactly?" Naruto shrugged. "Because I don't like it when people can't read in peace." The agent made a decision. They always did, eventually. The sword came up, a real cut, not a warning, aimed at the shoulder, the kind that said sit down and bleed without saying it out loud. Naruto's hand came up and caught the flat of the blade. His fingers closed around it with the chakra-hardened grip he'd been refining for 18 months, the kind that didn't cut because the chakra coating redirected the edge. He took the sword out of the agent's hand with a simple rotation of the wrist that used the agent's own force against him, stepped into the space it created, and hit the agent in the sternum once. The agent went backward into the alley wall and stayed there. The 2 with crossbows shot simultaneously. Naruto moved, not a dodge so much as a reorientation, the body memory of months of high-speed sparring kicking in before his conscious mind had processed the trajectory, and both bolts passed through empty air. He was already behind the leftmost agent, one hand on the back of the coat, and he used that grip to introduce that agent's face to the alley wall with measured force. Not lethal. Just completely conclusive. The 3rd agent got the sword. Not pointed at him, Naruto tossed it to one side and used the agent's moment of tracking that movement to step close and sweep his leg, dropping him in a clean takedown that ended with the agent face down in the alley dirt and Naruto's knee in his back. "Are you with Baroque Works?" Naruto asked pleasantly. The agent made a muffled sound that was either yes or help. "There will be more of you on the island," Naruto continued. "How many?" More muffled sounds. Naruto applied slightly more pressure. 8 more, the agent gasped. "A ship offshore." "Thanks." Naruto stood. The agent stayed down, which showed good judgment. He turned. The woman was looking at him now, book closed and held in both hands, with an expression that was working very hard to be neutral and not quite getting there. Something moved in her eyes, not surprise, she had too much practice for surprise, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like recalculation. 8 more, she said. "Yep." Naruto wiped his hands on his jacket. "You want to tell me what they want you for, or is that a whole thing?" She studied him. "You're not a Marine." "Definitely not." "Bounty hunter?" "No." "Then why did you were trying to read," Naruto said simply. "I already told the guy." "Were you listening?" "A beat." Then the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like a smile's shadow, the shape it left behind. "My name is Nico Robin. Naruto Uzumaki." He glanced toward the alley entrance. "We should move." The ship offshore heard the commotion, probably. She fell into step beside him without being asked. That was how it worked, he'd learn. Robin made decisions by the time most people were still considering whether to make them, and once made, she committed entirely without ceremony. They walked out of the alley and into the market street like 2 people who had entirely mundane reasons for being in a hurry. "There's a coffee stall 3 streets west," she said conversationally. "I know the owner." Back in trance. Lead the way. She did. The coffee stall's back room was small and smelled like roasting grounds and old wood, and the owner, a stout woman named Petra who greeted Robin with the particular warmth of someone who owed a debt and was glad of the chance to partially repay it, brought them cups without asking and then disappeared with the specific tact of someone who understood that the back room was for conversations that needed privacy. Robin wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at Naruto across the small table with the evaluating quality she probably used for everything. How old are you? 12. She absorbed this without visible reaction. And you have a ship? Yes. Crew? 3. She drank her coffee. The Baroque Works agents on this island will be joined by their ship's crew within the hour once they miss a check-in. That's approximately 30 people, some of whom are devil fruit users. I know. You handled 3. 30 is different. Naruto looked at her. Have you been handling them alone this whole time? A fractional pause. Yes. For how long? Another pause, longer. Something moved through her face, not pain exactly, but the ghost of where pain had been so long it had worn a groove. 8 years. 8 years alone, with an organization hunting you. 8 years of back entrances and coffee stalls and borrowed time on islands that couldn't protect you. 8 years of reading books in alleys while people pointed weapons at you, because reading was the one thing they couldn't take away while you were still awake. Naruto looked at his coffee. You don't have to do that anymore if you don't want to. Robin looked at him. You don't know what I am. What they want me for. Don't care. You should. I'll decide what I should care about. He looked up. You know the Grand Line. You know history, languages, probably navigation. My navigator is good but she's 17 and she's learning. He shrugged. And you've been surviving alone for 8 years, which means you know things that people who've never had to survive don't know. That's useful. That's very useful. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the back room, they could hear the market, vendors calling, feet on cobblestones, the normal sound of a place that hadn't yet registered the disruption in its alley. I read the poneglyphs, Robin said. It landed like a test, not offered to impress, offered to see how he reacted. That's why they want me. The government wants the knowledge either controlled or destroyed, and since I'm the knowledge, you're the target, Naruto finished. He nodded slowly. Poneglyphs are the stone tablets. Ancient history. She blinked. You know about them. I know enough. I've been in the Grand Line for a year. I ask questions when I land somewhere. He leaned forward slightly. Is that what you're looking for? The history? The true history. Her voice shifted on those 2 words, not reverence exactly, but the kind of precision that came from years of protecting something important from people who wanted to weaponize it. What happened during the Void Century? Why it was erased. Who Joy Boy was and what he promised and why it matters. She looked at him steadily. I've dedicated my entire life to this. People have tried to kill me for it since I was 8 years old. So you're not stopping? No. Good. Naruto sat back. I'm going to Raftel anyway. The silence that followed was different from the others. Robin set her cup down. No one can find Raftel, she said carefully. People have been trying for, I know. I've been gathering information for a year. He tapped the side of his head. I have 3 poneglyph rubbings, locations only, no text. Shanks's crew, I sailed with them for a month before I got my own ship, they gave me what they had. I need the other 2. And I need someone who can actually read them. Robin looked at him for a very long time. Naruto waited. He'd learned to wait, not patiently, exactly, because patience implied the possibility of stopping, and he never really stopped. But he'd learned that some things needed the space to decide for themselves. You said Shanks, she said finally. Shanks the red hair. Yeah. He gave you poneglyph rubbings. He said he was done chasing it. That someone else should. Naruto paused. He gave me the hat too, for a month, but I gave it back. Said I'd get my own when I found my own thing. Something shifted in Robin's expression. Softer. He does that, she said quietly, as if to herself. Then, more clearly, the 8 agents outside will be coordinating a sweep of the market within 20 minutes. Yep. Your ship, where is it? South Dock. My crew knows to be ready. She looked at him. The calculation was still happening behind her eyes, he could see that, but it wasn't the cold kind of calculation anymore. It was the kind that happens when someone who has spent years alone looks at something that might be real and tries to decide if they can afford to believe it. The last time I trusted someone, Robin said, I was 8 years old and it ended very badly. I know, Naruto said. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to sail with me. Those are different things. A very long pause. The South Dock, she said. Yeah. Then we should go. They went. What followed could charitably be described as a tactical departure and less charitably as a running fight through 3 streets of Market, across a rooftop, down a fishing pier, and onto the Tsubaki while 30 Baroque Works agents sorted themselves into pursuit. Robin proved immediately that she'd been understating her capabilities. The Hana Nomi let her bloom limbs from any surface, which she used with the calm efficiency of someone conducting a well-rehearsed orchestra, sprouting hands from the pier planks to upend pursuing agents, hands from the Tsubaki's sail to help with rigging, hands from Naruto's shoulders once, just once, to redirect a crossbow bolt that would have taken him in the throat. He'd looked back at her after that. She was already looking at the horizon. Naruto handled the agents that got close enough to board. He was 12 years old and moving like someone who had been forged by 2 years of genuine combat, and the partial sage shift came up naturally now under stress, just enough extra speed and force to make the math work decisively in his favor every time. The Baroque Works ship was faster than the Tsubaki, which should have been a problem except that Mako had been waiting for exactly this. She had a route mapped, a corridor between 2 weather anomalies that the larger ship couldn't safely navigate, and she took them through it with the specific confidence of someone who had done the calculation 3 times and liked the answer each time. Behind them, the Baroque Works ship tried to follow and turned back. By the time open water surrounded them on all sides and the only sound was wind and wave, Juro had come up from the galley with 5 cups of coffee because he'd heard from Bell that there was a new person and he treated newcomers the way most people treated important occasions, with food. Robin took the cup. Looked at it. Looked at Juro, who was large and former Marine and was watching her with a kind of careful welcome that didn't crowd. Thank you, she said. Of course, Juro said. And went back to his galley. Robin sat on the stern bench and drank her coffee and looked out at the wake that Tsubaki was leaving in the water, the white line of disturbed ocean that marked where they'd been, already closing, already fading. Naruto sat beside her. Not close enough to crowd. Just present. What's our heading? She asked. I was thinking Jaya, he said. There's a poneglyph there, according to what Shanks gave me. And there's someone on Jaya I need to find. Who? A man called the greatest swordsman's teacher. He'd heard the name twice on 2 different islands, always in the same tone, the tone people used for things they believed in enough to be a little afraid of. He apparently knows things about the void century that aren't in any poneglyph. Robin went very still. Silver's Rayleigh. Naruto looked at her. You know him? I know of him. She paused. The Dark King. He was the first mate of the Pirate King. Joel D. Roger. She looked at Naruto carefully. He was there when Roger found Raftel. Naruto felt the thing in his chest shift, not excitement, something bigger than excitement, the sensation of something enormous clicking into place. He was there. Yes. Then he knows the last 2 poneglyph locations. Almost certainly. Naruto nodded slowly. Then, he doesn't have to tell me. I'll ask. He'll decide. He looked at Robin. People decide things better when they're not being pushed. Robin looked at him for a moment. You're 12 years old, she said again, but differently than before. Less like a fact, more like something she was trying to reconcile. Does that change the plan? No, she said. It just makes it more interesting. The Grand Line gave them 3 storms, a becalmed stretch of 3 days where the air sat so still it felt like the ocean was holding its breath, an island populated entirely by gigantic birds that wanted the Tsubaki for nesting material, and a marine patrol that Mako outmaneuvered through a combination of navigation and sheer audacity before they reached Jaya. Jaya was a rough island. The main town, Mock Town, had the reputation of the kind of place that laughed at optimism, a haven for pirates who'd failed at the Grand Line and stopped moving, running out their days on alcohol and old stories. The buildings leaned. The mood leaned too, in the same direction. Naruto walked through it like it was any other place, which seemed to genuinely confuse people. They found Rayleigh not through information networks but through the specific trick of Robin asking 3 people in 3 different bars the same sideways question about old swords and Roger, and getting 3 different partial answers that together pointed to a shipwright's workshop near the coast. Silver's Rayleigh was, at first glance, an old man fixing a dinghy. He was also, at second glance, the kind of old man who had arrived at old age by surviving everything that should have prevented it, and carried that fact in the specific way he held his shoulders, not trying to appear larger, just actually taking up the exact amount of space he was entitled to and not apologizing for it. He looked up when they came in. Saw Robin first, a flicker of recognition, old and complicated. Then Naruto, and the recognition was different. Not personal recognition. More like someone seeing a pattern they'd seen in a different configuration before. Nico Robin, he said. Been a while since anyone worth talking to came to Jaya. Rayleigh-san. Robin inclined her head slightly. Rayleigh looked at Naruto. And you are? Naruto Uzumaki. He stepped forward. I want to go to Raftel. Rayleigh set down his tool. Looked at him with the unhurried attention of someone who had stopped being surprised by people but hadn't stopped being curious about them. Everyone wants to go to Raftel. I know. But I can read the poneglyphs, she can. He nodded at Robin. I have 3 locations. I need the other 2. And I need to know what Roger found there, so I know what I'm walking into. Why? Rayleigh said simply. Naruto paused. It was a good question. The best question. Because the world is big, he said slowly, and most of it is being run badly. And there's something at Raftel that matters, not just the treasure, the meaning of it. Joy Boy's promise. Whatever was supposed to happen that didn't. He met Rayleigh's eyes. I think it's supposed to happen now. I don't know why I think that. But I think it. Rayleigh studied him for a long moment. The workshop was quiet except for the water lapping at the coast outside. Roger said something like that, Rayleigh said. Almost exactly like that, actually. He picked up his tool again. He was wrong about the timing. He knew he was wrong. Too soon, the world wasn't ready. He looked back at Naruto. He also said the right person would come along eventually. Someone who carried the same will. A pause. He didn't say they'd be 12. I'll be older by the time I get there. Something moved through Rayleigh's face. Not a smile, something underneath a smile. Yes. You will be. He set the tool down again. Sit down, Uzumaki. This will take a while. Naruto sat. Robin sat beside him. She had her book out, but she wasn't reading it. She was listening. And Rayleigh, last of the Roger pirates, first mate of the king of the pirates, Dark King, an old man with a dinghy, talked for 4 hours. They were back on the Tsubaki by nightfall, heading east with 2 new poneglyph coordinates and a heading that Mako was still plotting with the focused intensity of someone triangulating a myth. Naruto was on the bow, watching the dark water ahead. The stars were out, different stars than over Konoha, arranged in patterns he'd learned to navigate by over 2 years of sailing, and they felt like his now. Robin came and stood beside him. He said Roger couldn't hear the poneglyphs. He had to have them read. But he still found Raftel. Yes. So the reading is useful, but it's not the only way. The reading, Robin said carefully, is what tells you what you're finding. What it means. What Joy Boy's message actually was. She paused. Without that, you find the place and you find treasure and you don't understand any of it. Naruto nodded slowly. And with it? She was quiet for a moment. Then, with it, you might actually be able to do something about it. He looked out at the water. Behind him, he could hear Juro and Bell arguing about something in the companionable way they developed, and Mako humming over her charts. Robin, he said. Thank you for coming. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was quiet. Don't thank me yet. The next 2 poneglyph islands are both marine-controlled territories. I know. You're not concerned. I'm concerned, he said. But concerned doesn't mean stopped. He looked at her sideways. Different things. A pause. You say that a lot. It keeps being true. He turned back to the water. The stars moved slowly overhead. Get some sleep. Mako says we hit weather tomorrow. What kind? The kind she's excited about, which is the kind I'm not excited about. Robin made a sound that was, definitively, a suppressed laugh. She turned toward the cabin. Stopped. Naruto. Yeah. The bounty they have on me, she said, back still turned. It's 79 million berries. For context, that's significant. Having me on your ship will make you a target for every bounty hunter in the Grand Line. Naruto was quiet for a second. Then, what's my bounty? You have one. I beat a Marine captain 2 months ago. There should be a poster somewhere. She thought about it. I haven't seen it. 44 million, he said. Which is apparently amusing to people because of my age. They put a question mark after it. Robin turned to look at him. A question mark. Yeah. Because the Marines who reported it apparently couldn't decide if I was dangerous or just a weird kid. Another long pause. Then Robin said, with the precision of someone choosing words carefully, I think they'll remove the question mark soon. Yeah, Naruto said. I think so too. She went below. He stayed on the bow. The stars moved. The water breathed. Somewhere behind his ribs, Kurama settled into the specific warmth that meant something real is happening, and Naruto felt it like a hand on his shoulder. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small journal, not for navigation, not for poneglyph coordinates. He'd been keeping it since the 2nd month. Just things. Moments. People. The feeling of the fruit going down. Shanks's real laugh. Robin's shadow of a smile. Rayleigh talking about Roger and looking at Naruto like he was reading a letter someone else had written a very long time ago. He wrote one line. I think I know what I'm doing here now. He closed the journal. Put it back. Looked at the horizon. It was a long way to Raftel. But the stars were his now, and the water knew his wake, and he had people behind him who chose to be there. It was, by a very long distance, enough. Chapter 3, The Weight of Gold. Raftel did not announce itself. That was the first thing Naruto noticed. No dramatic weather shift, no poneglyph-lit beacon, no choir of significance as the Tsubaki crested the last navigational corridor and the island came into view. It just appeared, the way real things appeared, through morning mist and ordinary light, an island shaped like a fist pressed into the sea, dark cliffs rising from the water with the patient authority of something that had been waiting long enough to stop being impatient about it. He was 14. For years gone from the forest clearing where he'd stood with a kunai and a bad day. For years of salt and storm and blood and the kind of living that didn't leave you the same person you were when you started. That's it, Mako said from the navigation bench. Her voice was completely flat. She'd been running calculations against Robin's final poneglyph reading for 6 hours without sleeping, and the flatness was the tone she used when she was too certain to be excited. Coordinates match. Island matches the description Rayleigh gave. That is 100% it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Bell broke the silence by putting down his hammer. He'd been patching a rivet on the portside railing, because Bell's hands didn't stop regardless of the occasion, and looking at the island with the expression of a man who had been on this ship through 2 years of genuinely terrible things and was trying to decide how he felt about arriving somewhere good. "We made it," he said. "We made it," Naruto said. Juro came up from the galley carrying a pot of coffee. Looked at the island. Looked at Naruto. "After we do this massive historical thing, can we eat breakfast? Because I have an entire breakfast ready downstairs that is going to be cold by the time anyone remembers it's there." Robin made a sound that had graduated from suppressed laugh to actual quiet laugh over the last 2 years, and the sound of it was still one of Naruto's favorite things on the ship. "After," he said. "Definitely after." He took the dinghy in alone. Not because he didn't want the crew there, it was the opposite of that. But Rayleigh had said something in Mock Town that had stayed with him through 2 years of travel. Roger went in with his whole crew and what he found there changed all of them in ways they didn't choose. Know what you're walking into before you take people with you. It was the most cautious thing the former pirate had said across 4 hours, which meant it was the one Naruto waited most. Robin had looked at him when he said he was going alone. Not protest, Robin didn't protest things, she evaluated them. After a moment she'd nodded, which was her version of "I disagree but I understand." He rowed to shore through water so still it looked like dark glass. The interior of Raftel was a forest. Not a threatening forest, not carnivorous island, not toxic weather pocket. Just old trees, old in the way that meant they'd been growing since before anyone alive could remember, with root systems that surfaced and submerged and surfaced again like the slow breathing of something buried. Light came through the canopy in solid columns that moved when the leaves moved. It was quiet in the way that lived places were quiet, not empty, just attentive. He found the first chamber after 20 minutes of walking. It wasn't hidden, exactly. Nothing on Raftel seemed to be hidden, things were simply here, where they'd always been, waiting for someone to arrive and see them. The chamber was natural stone, roofed by a section of cliff that had fallen and balanced centuries ago, and inside it were the poneglyphs. Not 1. Not 4. 12. Arranged in a rough circle, each one taller than a man, covered in script that Robin could read but that Naruto could only feel, and he did feel it, a low resonance in his chest that wasn't Kurama and wasn't the devil fruit but was something that sat underneath both, something older. In the center of the circle was the treasure. Naruto stood at the edge of the chamber and looked at it for a long time. He'd imagined gold. Everyone imagined gold, the whole world imagined gold, that was the entire self-sustaining mythology of the One Piece, mountains of it, the accumulated wealth of every sea. And there was gold, chests of it, old and tarnished, stacked against the back wall with the practical organization of people who had worked hard for it and didn't feel the need to display it dramatically. Enough gold to buy a country. Several countries. But the gold wasn't what mattered. What mattered was in the center of the circle. It was a crown. Not worn, resting on a stone pedestal, exactly at the center of the 12 poneglyphs, sized for a human head but not a specific one. It was made of something that wasn't quite metal, wasn't quite stone, some material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and worked into its surface were the same swirling patterns as the devil fruit in the cave at Gecko's Rest, the same patterns as the poneglyphs, the same patterns as the old carvings in Konoha that Naruto had looked at as a child without understanding what he was looking at. He walked into the circle. The resonance deepened, not loud, not aggressive, just present, like a heartbeat. He stopped in front of the crown. Okay, he said to it, to the room, to whatever intelligence or intent had been baked into this place over centuries. I'm here. Nothing happened. He hadn't expected anything to happen. He reached out and touched the crown, 2 fingers on its rim. The world went sideways. Not physically. He was still standing in the chamber. But his awareness expanded in a way that had no physical analog, like trying to describe color to someone who'd only ever seen in black and white. He could feel the 12 poneglyphs not as stone but as voices, not speaking words but holding intent the way a clenched fist holds something without opening. He could feel the accumulated weight of every person who had held the sovereign authority of Joy Boy's line, not memories exactly, more like impressions, the way a handle worn smooth by generations of hands holds the shape of all of them. And in the middle of all of it was a question. Not in words. In the same language as Kurama's occasional communications, the shape of meaning language that bypassed translation. The question was, what will you do with it? Naruto stood there with his fingers on the crown and the question hanging in the expanded space of his awareness. He thought about Konoha. About the sign outside the ramen stand. About Irika looking through glass. About the Chunin at the gate who hadn't stopped him because acknowledging him leaving would have required acknowledging he existed. He thought about Kokoro crying on the dock in Logue Town. About the fisherman's kid on Gecko's Rest who knew about the cave and hadn't told anyone but somehow knew he should. About the islands and the Grand Line that had no marine presence and consequently no protection, just people living at the mercy of whoever passed through. About Mako being sold to cover a debt. About Juro on a raft because he'd refused to follow an order that was wrong. He thought about Robin, 8 years old, watching people who should have protected her make the decision not to. He thought about Whitebeard, he hadn't met him yet, that was still ahead, but he'd been hearing about him across 2 years on the water. The man who called his crew his children. Who had decided that family was a thing you chose and maintained through action, not blood and paperwork. What will you do with it? Protect it, Naruto said. Not grandly. Not with the volume he usually brought to things. Quietly, because quiet was what the question deserved. Whatever it is. Whoever needs it. I'll protect it. And then he said the second part, the part that came without planning, and I'll make it worth protecting. The crown lifted from the pedestal. He didn't lift it. It rose, clear of the stone, and settled onto his hands with a weight that was both physical and something else, the weight of an inheritance that had been waiting for the right set of hands to pass itself to. The resonance in his chest synchronized with it the way a tuning fork synchronized with its frequency, and Kurama, deep behind the seal, made the sound again, the one Naruto had heard in the cave at Gecko's Rest. Reverence. He looked at the crown in his hands. Looked around at the gold against the back wall, the 12 poneglyphs, the chamber that had been here for 800 years. He put the crown on. It fit exactly. He came back out of the forest 4 hours later. The dinghy was where he'd left it. The Tsubaki was where she'd been, and as he rowed back across the still water, he could see all 4 of his crew at the railing watching him come. He was carrying 2 things when he climbed up, a chest that Belle helped haul over the railing, and the crown on his head. Robin looked at the crown. She was very still. Read them, Naruto said. All 12. Take whatever time you need. She looked at him. Then at the island. Then back at him. What's in the chest? I didn't count. A lot. Naruto. She stepped close and looked at the crown with the specific focus she brought to poneglyphs. The swirling script on it, he could see her eyes moving across it, parsing, translating in real time. Her face did something complicated. This is, tell me after you read the stones, he said. In order. Rayleigh said in order. She went to the island alone. He didn't ask her not to. She was the reason they could understand what was there, it was hers as much as his, maybe more. While she was gone he sat on the deck and opened the chest with Belle and they looked at the gold for a while. "That's a lot of gold," Belle said. "Yeah. Like. A lot. I know. What are we doing with it?" Naruto leaned back on his hands and looked up at the sky. "Building something," he said. Belle thought about it. "What kind of something?" "Something that makes sense." He paused. "Something that lasts." Belle looked at the gold. Looked at the sky. "I'm going to need more tools," he said. "I'll get you more tools. Good tools. Not the cheap marine contractor garbage. The best tools," Naruto said. "Whatever you need." Belle nodded, satisfied, and went back to patching the railing. Robin came back at sunset. She was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet, not controlled silence, but the specific stillness of someone who had just read something enormous and was still processing the size of it. She sat across from Naruto on the stern deck. Juro brought 2 cups of tea without being asked, because Juro had learned Robin's tells months ago and was better at anticipating people than anyone who spent most of their time arguing with cookware had any right to be. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Naruto waited. "Joy boy," she said finally. His name was in the first stone. He was a man who made a promise to the people of an island called Fishman Island, 800 years ago. He couldn't keep it. Not because he lied, because the world wasn't ready. The power didn't exist yet to keep it. She paused. He left the treasure here. Not as wealth. As a signal. Proof that someone had come, had understood, and was committing to finish what he started. What was the promise? To free everyone. She said it simply. To create a world where no one person or government could hold the sea hostage. Where the history that was erased could be told. Where the people who were crushed so that the world government could exist were acknowledged and given back their weight in the world. She looked at Naruto. He didn't promise a revolution. He promised a sovereign. Someone who sat outside the existing power structure and couldn't be absorbed into it. Naruto was quiet for a long moment. The sun finished setting. The stars came out. "The crown," he said. "It's the physical representation of that sovereignty. Joy Boy left it here specifically, whoever found it and accepted it wasn't just taking wealth. They were accepting the role." She paused. "The world government has been trying to prevent anyone from finding Raftel for 800 years specifically because of what that crown means. A sovereign who exists outside their authority is the one thing they can't politically neutralize. They'd try to militarily neutralize them instead." "Yes." Naruto reached up and touched the crown. It was warm. It was always warm now, since he'd put it on, like something that had been cold for a very long time and was gradually remembering what warmth felt like. "Then we need to be strong enough that the military option looks stupid." Robin looked at him. "We need more than strength. We need legitimacy. Allies. Infrastructure." She said the next part carefully. "We need an empire." The word sat between them on the deck. Naruto had been thinking about it since the chamber. Not the word, the concept, the shape of what the crown meant in practical terms. You couldn't hold a sovereignty without something to be sovereign over. You couldn't protect the sea lanes and the unprotected islands and the history Robin needed to tell without somewhere from which to do it, some structural reality that converted his ability to hit things very hard into something that lasted after he stopped being in the room. "An empire," he said slowly. "A different kind," Robin said. "Not territorial conquest. Not tribute. Trade protection. Free passage. Historical preservation. A neutral authority that the world government can't absorb because its legitimacy doesn't come from their system." She was speaking faster now, the way she spoke when something she'd been thinking about for a long time finally had permission to come out. "The islands that have no protection, you bring them under your banner voluntarily. You protect their trade routes. In return, they acknowledge your sovereignty. No taxation that bleeds them. No conscription. Just membership. And the gold funds it. The gold funds the start of it. After that it funds itself. She looked at the chest. That is enough to build 12 warships, staff them, provision them for 3 years, establish 3 permanent trading posts with supply chains, and still have enough reserve to weather 2 years of operating loss while the routes establish themselves. Naruto stared at her. You did that math in your head. I did that math on the island while I was reading. While you were reading the poneglyphs. I multitask. He laughed, not his performance laugh, the real one, the one that came from somewhere without planning and was gone before he could decide how he felt about it. Robin looked slightly startled by it, the way she still occasionally was when something genuine came out of him fast. Okay, he said. We build it. There's one more thing, Robin said. The crown and what it represents. You can't do this without an ally who commands genuine military respect. Someone the Yonko level, or the Yonko themselves. Otherwise you build this empire and the world government sends an admiral to dismantle it on day 1. Naruto thought about it. Whitebeard. Robin nodded slowly. He's the right choice. He has the reach, the respect, and the philosophy. He's been doing a version of what you're describing for his crew for decades. Extending that model isn't a stretch for him. She paused. He's also dying. Naruto looked at her sharply. Not immediately, she said. But people who know him say it's visible. The pace of it is slow, but the direction is clear. She met his eyes. That's important because it means he wants his legacy secured. What you're offering him, a continuation of his philosophy in a form that outlasts him, is something he might want badly enough to ally with a 14-year-old who found the One Piece. I'm not using his mortality to manipulate him. I know. I'm saying its context. She held his gaze. He'll respect you for being direct about it. Naruto looked out at the water. Raftel was dark behind them, just the outline of cliffs against a field of stars. The island that had been here for 800 years, waiting. Set a course for the Moby Dick, he said. Mako, who had been pretending to check the compass from 6 feet away, immediately started calculating. They found the Moby Dick 12 days later. It was hard to miss. The ship was roughly the size of a small neighborhood, sailing under the skull and crossbones with a mark no pirate in any sea would mistake. The Whitebeard Pirates. The man who called himself the world's strongest. Naruto came alongside in the Tsubaki, which next to the Moby Dick looked like a shoebox next to a cathedral. He stood at the Tsubaki's bow and called up to the deck. I need to speak with Edward Newgate. From the vast deck above, a dozen faces appeared over the railing. The expressions ranged from amusement to the specific professional wariness of people who spent their days in environments where underestimating small fast things got you killed. A voice came down. A voice that was, genuinely, the largest voice Naruto had ever heard, not just loud, large, with the quality of something that had been filling spaces too big for other voices for decades. Who's asking, brat? Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto called back. Emperor of the Uzumaki sovereignty. The pause that followed had a particular texture. Then, from somewhere above and behind the railing faces, a laugh. Not a short one. A genuine, whole-body laugh that carried across water and probably across the next 3 islands. Garararara. An emperor. On that ship. Come up here, Emperor, and let me get a look at you. He went up. Whitebeard was exactly what every story about him failed to adequately communicate. The man was simply more than the space around him. Physically enormous, yes, scarred and marked by decades of life lived at the absolute edge of what was survivable, but beyond the physical it was the presence. Not the same quality as Shanks's gravity, which was like a current pulling things toward it. Whitebeard's was more like weather. You didn't get pulled into his orbit. You became aware that you were already inside it and had been for some time. He was sitting in what could only be described as a throne that happened to be on the deck of a ship, and he looked down at Naruto with the specific attention of someone who had long since graduated from being impressed by most things and was deciding whether this qualified as an exception. Naruto looked back up at him with the specific quality that he now knew was the thing that set him apart from most people in armed confrontations: he didn't perform comfort. He didn't fake it, didn't posture. He was just actually comfortable, the way a person was comfortable in their own body when they'd learned to live in it completely. "You're 14, Whitebeard said. You're going to keep bringing that up, or are we going to talk?" A breath of absolute silence from the assembled Whitebeard crew. Then Whitebeard laughed again, bigger than before. "Garurarara. I like you already, brat." He leaned forward in his throne. "Marco. Get the boy a drink. Non-alcoholic, he's a child." And then to Naruto, the laugh fading into something that was still warm but carried more weight: "Sit. Talk. I'll listen." Naruto sat on the deck, not in a chair, just cross-legged on the wood, like he had when Shanks first talked to him, because this was a conversation between people who were deciding whether to trust each other, and formality was a way of hiding from that. "You've heard the name Joy Boy," he said. Whitebeard's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Everyone's heard of Joy Boy. I found Raftel." Another silence. Longer. Whitebeard's expression moved through several things: surprise, recalibration, the specific evaluation of someone who had encountered many false claims to many significant things and had developed very good sensors for the difference between false and real. Naruto reached up and took the crown off his head and held it out, flat on both palms, so Whitebeard could see the script on its surface. Whitebeard looked at the crown for a long time. Then he looked at Naruto. "Where's the treasure?" "On my ship. My navigator has an inventory she's been working on. 62 chests of gold, which by our estimation converts to approximately 4 billion berries at current rates, plus poneglyph rubbings that constitute the most complete record of the void century in existence, plus documentation of the Joy Boy line's sovereign authority that predates the world government's establishment by 4 centuries. He paused. "I also have a crew member who can read poneglyphs." "Nico Robin," said Marco, from somewhere to his left. Naruto looked at him. Marco was a tall man with calm eyes and the particular stillness of someone extremely capable who'd found no reason to prove it in the last 20 minutes. "You know her," Naruto said. "We know of her. The world government has been hunting her for, she's under my protection," Naruto said. "Has been for 2 years." Marco absorbed this. Looked at Whitebeard. Whitebeard was still looking at the crown. "Put it back on, brat. It looks wrong just sitting there." Naruto put it back on. "What do you want from me?" Whitebeard said. "Recognition," Naruto said. "Not permission. I'm not asking you to approve what I'm doing. I'm telling you what I'm doing and asking if you want to be allied to it, because you're the person in this ocean whose alliance means something to the people who'd otherwise decide to test whether my empire survives its first month. And in return, the philosophy you've been running for decades: family, protection, chosen bonds, I extend that model to the sea lanes and the unprotected islands. Your legacy outlasts you in a form you recognize." He paused, and the pause carried the weight of Robin's words on the stern deck, not used as manipulation but offered as honest context. "I know what the rumors say about your health. I'm not using it against you. I'm saying, this is a thing you built that can continue." Whitebeard was very still. Somewhere on the deck, someone made a sound that suggested they expected the next thing to be violent. But Whitebeard looked at Naruto for a long time, the specific look of a man deciding something that mattered, and then he said, very quietly, "My children." "Your children," Naruto said. "And anyone else who needs it." Another long pause. Then Whitebeard reached out with one enormous hand, not for a handshake, that was too small a gesture for this, but palm down, flat, an offer. "Show me you can hold it," he said. "A real fight. I need to know the man I'm allying with." I'm 14. Garurara. And? Naruto looked at the hand. Then at Whitebeard. Then he stood up from the deck and felt the crown settle against his head and Kurama shift into readiness behind his ribs like a tide coming in. Don't hold back, Naruto said. I wasn't planning to, Whitebeard said. I haven't said that to anyone in 15 years. And the ocean, for about 12 seconds, became extremely dramatic. It wasn't a fight in the traditional sense. Whitebeard's Gura Gura no Mi, the power to shatter anything, to make the air itself crack like glass, met Naruto's stacked abilities head-on, and the result was two shockwaves meeting in the space between a man and a boy and doing what happens when forces of equivalent intent collide. The Tsubaki rocked in its own wake. 3 Whitebeard crew members sat down involuntarily. At the 12-second mark, both of them were still standing. Barely, in Naruto's case, one knee down, breathing hard, the sage shift at its full extent now, golden light visible around his arms and shoulders, Kurama's chakra bleeding through in clean controlled lines. Whitebeard had one hand braced on his throne armrest. Both of them were looking at each other. Then Whitebeard laughed. The biggest laugh yet. The kind that started in the chest and ended up being a weather event. Garurara. 12 seconds. The last person who lasted more than 3 against me in a test strike was Garp himself. He stood fully, shaking the deck, and the grin on his face was enormous and genuine and warm in the way that huge things were sometimes warm, not delicate warmth, the kind that filled entire spaces. Alliance, he announced to his crew. We have a new emperor, and he is 12 seconds of a man. 14, Naruto said from one knee, slightly out of breath. 14 seconds of a man. Naruto looked at Marco. Is he always like this? Marco considered. This is actually restrained. He really likes you. The Uzumaki sovereignty was officially established 4 months later, on a neutral island that Robin had selected for its central position in the Grand Line and its complete absence of prior political claim. They called it Uzushio, the Whirlpool, and the island earned the name within weeks as trade ships began diverting through it, attracted by the protection guarantee and the rates Robin had set, which were specifically calibrated to undercut every existing toll structure without being low enough to suggest a trap. Whitebeard sent 3 ships to patrol the sovereignty's initial sea lanes. 3 of his commanders came in person to help establish the structure, because Whitebeard had looked at what Naruto was building and recognized the bones of it as something he'd been trying to articulate for years and hadn't had the architecture for. Bell built the first permanent structure on Uzushio in 6 days, working without stopping except to eat, and Juro fed the construction crew with the organized fury of someone who had always believed that people worked better when they weren't hungry, which was self-evidently true but somehow always treated as a revelation. Robin spent 3 weeks in the new library, the first permanent poneglyph repository in the world, stone walls, temperature-controlled through a passive ventilation system Bell designed, fireproof because Robin had asked specifically and Bell had said obviously, transcribing, translating, annotating. Mako mapped trade routes. All of them. Every viable corridor in the Grand Line. She presented the finished maps to Naruto rolled in a case and said, "That took me 4 months but I'm done and now I need a week of sleep." He told her to take 2. She took 3 and came back looking like a different person. And Naruto ran his empire. He was 14, and it was messy, and he made mistakes. He misread a trade alliance early on and had to renegotiate from a worse position, which taught him the specific lesson that being strong in a fight and being strong at a table were different skills with different muscles. He trusted a merchant on Sabaody Archipelago who turned out to be feeding information to a marine intelligence unit, and that cost him a week of exposure and a security restructuring that Robin oversaw with the grim efficiency of someone who had been learning that lesson since she was 8. He also got things right. The island of Tato, which had been paying tribute to a mid-level pirate lord for 6 years and hadn't been able to stop, sent a messenger asking to join the sovereignty and Naruto arrived personally, dealt with the pirate lord, and stayed for 3 days to make sure the transition worked before he left. The story traveled. It traveled faster than the Tsubaki. By 15, he had 12 islands under the sovereignty's banner. By 15 and a half, 22. By the time he turned 16, he had 31 islands, 6 warships, a standing crew of 400, a treasury that had expanded from the Raftel gold through trade into something Robin described as functionally inexhaustible, and a bounty from the world government that had climbed through 7 figures and kept going. And somewhere in all of it, the thought of Konoha came back. It had always been there, not loud, not urgent, but present the way a lone note was present in music, felt more than heard. He'd written in his journal occasionally, just for himself, processing the shape of the place he'd left and what it might have become and what he might have become in it if the rift had never opened. The academy. The sign. The homework no one asked to see. Irika. That one landed differently. Had always landed differently. Because Irika wasn't the village, Irika was one man who looked through glass sometimes and also, on 2 specific days in Naruto's memory, had looked through the glass and seen something on the other side and been startled by it, in the way people were startled by things they weren't prepared to find. Not cruel, not indifferent. Just, overwhelmed in a way he hadn't worked through yet. Naruto wondered if he'd worked through it by now. Wondered what 6 years looked like from the other side of the rift. He wrote the letter on a Tuesday, sitting at the desk in his cabin on the new flagship, not the Tsubaki, which was now Bell's private project and was being rebuilt into something extraordinary, but a proper warship, twice the size, christened Uzumaki in Bell's careful paintwork and sailing under a flag that Mako had designed, orange and red, the Uzumaki spiral at its center, and at the top a crown. The letter said, "To whoever finds this, if the rift is still there, in the clearing in the forest outside the east gate. If you're reading this, I'm alive. I found something. I built something. I'm coming back, but not yet. Not until it's done." Naruto he folded it. Addressed it to the clearing. Sent it with one of his courier hawks, which he knew almost certainly couldn't cross dimensions, but the act of sending it mattered regardless. Then he looked at the crown on the desk beside him. He didn't always wear it, though it went with him everywhere, because wearing it constantly was the kind of theatrical gesture that would have embarrassed him on principle. He picked it up. Held it. The world wasn't ready, Rayleigh had said about Roger. Too soon. Was it ready now? Was he ready? 14, 15, 16, older than he'd been, younger than anyone running an empire probably should be. He'd fought people who were legends. He'd built something that didn't exist 3 years ago and now protected 31 islands and a trade network that touched more of the Grand Line than most Marines ever saw. Was that enough? The question wasn't about the crown. It wasn't even about Joy Boy's promise, not really. It was smaller and older than all of that. Was he enough? From behind his ribs, Kurama answered. Not in words, they'd graduated past that, 2 years ago, into something more direct. A feeling. The feeling of something enormous and old and complicated pressing a hand flat against the inside of his chest and saying, "Yes. You always were." Naruto sat with that for a while. Then he put the crown on and went to the navigation deck and told Mako to plot a course toward the Fire Country coast. Finally, Mako said, without looking up. "I've had it ready for 6 months." He looked at her. "You've been waiting for me to say it." "I've been waiting for you to figure out you were ready." She looked up. "You were ready 6 months ago. You didn't say anything." "Not my thing to say." She tapped the chart. 3 weeks if the weather cooperates. 2.5 if it doesn't, because bad weather in this corridor runs east-northeast and we run right on the edge of it. She looked at him. "What are we bringing?" Naruto thought about the 31 islands. The 6 warships. The 400 crew. The gold and the sovereignty and the crown and the philosophy and the years. "Everything," he said. Mako looked back at her charts. "I'll need a bigger map." The letter arrived in Konoha on a Thursday, delivered not by Hawk but by something else, something that moved through the forest at the edge of perception and left the folded paper exactly in the center of the clearing, balanced on a root, as though it had always been there. Nobody was in the clearing when it arrived. But on Friday morning, Irika Yumano came to the clearing before dawn. He'd been coming once a week for 6 years, a habit he'd never explained to anyone, and that had started the week after a blonde student stopped appearing in his class, and he found the paper. He unfolded it. Read it 3 times. Then he sat down on the root and put his face in his hands, not in grief but in the specific release of someone who had been holding something tight for a very long time and had just been given permission to let it go. He didn't cry. He sat for a while, and then he stood up, folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside his vest against his chest, and walked back toward the village. There were things to prepare for. Chapter 4, The Emperor Returns. The fleet appeared on the horizon at dawn, and for a full 10 minutes, the Chunin on watch duty at Konoha's coastal observation post in the Land of Fire's southern port town of Naminato simply stared at it and did not send the signal. Not because he was derelict. Because his brain kept refusing the information his eyes were sending it. There were 9 ships. Not small ones, not merchant vessels or fishing boats or even the scaled-up transport barges that occasionally moved goods between the Fire Country coast and the southern islands. These were warships, proper and deliberate, with reinforced hulls and gun ports and the kind of structural confidence that came from being built by someone who understood exactly what they were for. They were painted in deep orange and red, and even from the distance of the observation post, the flags were readable, an Uzumaki spiral, and above it a crown. The lead ship was the largest. It sat at the center of the formation the way a word sat at the center of a sentence, the thing everything else was arranged around. Its hull was carved along the bow with a spiral pattern that matched the flag, and its name was painted in clean black letters that the observing Chunin had to squint to read, Uzumaki. He sent the signal. Then he sent it again, because the first one hadn't felt adequate. Then he sent a third signal that wasn't in the standard code and just said, in plain language, "Please come look at this." The news reached Konoha in 3 hours. By which point the fleet had anchored in Naminato's harbor, all 9 ships, taking up every available berth and some that weren't technically berths, and the town had quietly tripled its visible civilian population as people came out of buildings to look. Word traveled the way it always traveled in Shinobi country, fast and sideways, through channels official and otherwise, growing details as it went. By the time it reached the Hokage's tower it had acquired several inaccuracies and one significant truth, that someone with an Uzumaki name and a crown had arrived at the Land of Fire coast with a fleet, and that fleet was not moving, and nobody had yet determined whether that was patience or a statement. Tsunade was on her 3rd cup of tea of the morning when Shizen came in with the report. She read it once. Set it down. Picked it up and read it again. How old did they say he was? 16, by the crew member who spoke to the harbor master, Shizen said. Blonde. Whisker marks. Tsunade was quiet for a moment. She'd inherited Naruto's file when she took the Hokage seat, a thin file by the standards of active shinobi, almost empty, most of it academy attendance records and one medical assessment from age 7 that she'd read 3 times because the chakra notation in it was extraordinary and nobody had apparently done anything about it. The file ended abruptly at age 10, with a single line in the absence log, student did not appear for class. Investigation, no result. 6 years. Not a body. Not a trace. A dimensional anomaly in the forest that her best sensor Nin could detect but not open, that Jiraiya had looked at twice and said felt like something between a sealing technique and a natural phenomenon, which was not a useful distinction. She put the report down and stood. Get me a horse. Shizen blinked. You're going personally. If that's who I think it is, Tsunade said, already moving toward the door, then sending anyone else first would be the wrong message. The harbor at Naminato smelled like salt and fresh timber and the specific warm scent of Juro's cooking, which had been going since before the fleet anchored because Juro believed in feeding people who were nervous and the crew was, at various levels, aware that today was significant. Naruto was on the dock when Tsunade arrived. Not waiting dramatically, doing paperwork, standing at a folding table that Bell had set up on the dock specifically for this purpose because Naruto refused to let the day's actual administrative work fall behind just because it was also a historic occasion. He had a stack of trade documents on one side, a cup of tea on the other, and the crown on his head, and he was reading a supply manifest with the focused attention of someone who had learned that empires ran on details. He looked up when the horses came down the dock road. Tsunade saw him see her, and she saw the moment of recognition, not of her specifically, probably, because he'd been 10 when he left and she hadn't been Hokage then, but of the Hokage hat, which was unmistakable. He straightened. Not to attention, not with any kind of deference, just to full height, the way people stood when they were about to have a conversation that mattered. She stopped her horse 10 feet from him and looked at him properly. He was tall for 16. Broader than the academy file had suggested he'd be, not artificially, just built, the way people built who had been doing hard physical work for years in the specific way that fighting and sailing required. The whisker marks were exactly as described in the old medical file, 6 of them, 3 per cheek. His eyes were the specific blue that appeared in the old Uzumaki clan records, the shade that the archivists called Storm Sea in their color notations. The crown sat on his head with the comfort of something that belonged there, and the orange jacket he was wearing over his working clothes was battered in a way that suggested it was old enough to have history. "Hokage-sama," he said. Respectful but not formal. Like acknowledging a title without subordinating himself to it. "Naruto Uzumaki," Tsunade said. She looked at the fleet. Looked back at him. "You've been busy. 6 years is a long time." She dismounted. Shizune stayed on her horse, hand near her medical pouch out of professional habit, but her expression was the wide-eyed one she used when she'd encountered something that exceeded her preparation. Tsunade's 2-guard jonin had the specific careful stillness of people who were looking at the warships and doing rapid tactical assessments that were not arriving at comfortable conclusions. 9 warships, Tsunade said. Yes. How many crew? 412, currently. I have another 160 doing sovereignty work on 3 of my islands. He said my islands with zero self-consciousness. Not boasting, stating. Your islands, she said. 31 of them. He picked up a document from the stack and held it out. This is the formal sovereignty treaty documentation. We had it drawn up by the Maritime Legal Authority on Sabaody Archipelago. It's binding under existing sea law, which technically predates the Shinobi Alliance treaties, which means it sits in a legal gray area that's complicated to challenge. A pause. Robin, my chief advisor, spent 3 months on the legal architecture specifically. Tsunade took the document. Didn't look at it yet. She was still looking at him. Did you know who you were? Before you left. The question landed differently than a tactical query. Naruto looked at her for a moment, reading the weight of it. I knew my name, he said. I knew what people thought about my name. I didn't know what I could do with it yet. And now you do. Now I do. She looked at the document in her hands. The seal at the bottom was an Uzumaki spiral pressed into orange wax, and the crown watermark on the paper was fine enough to suggest someone had spent real time on the stationery. The council is going to have a great deal to say about this. I know. Danzo Shimura especially. Something shifted in Naruto's expression at that name. Not fear, she was cataloging carefully and there was definitely no fear. Something more like the expression people wore when they came across a problem they'd already thought through and arrived at a conclusion about. I know about Danzo, he said. More than he'd be comfortable with, probably. Robin is thorough. Tsunade looked at him. You've been gathering intelligence on Konoha. On individuals within Konoha who represent active threats to my sovereignty and my crew. He held her gaze. That includes Root's monitoring of the dimensional rift. They've sent 2 operatives through in the last 3 years. 1 came back. 1 didn't. He said it plainly. I didn't kill the second one. He tried to sabotage one of my ships during a storm and went into the ocean. I didn't look for him. The silence on the dock had a very specific quality. Tsunade put the document inside her coat. Come to the village, she said. Not a request. Not a summons either, Naruto said. I'll come because I want to. Tomorrow morning. He looked at her steadily. There are things I need to do first. She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once. Tomorrow morning. She put her foot back in the stirrup and looked down at him from the height of the horse. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not dead. I had a hard time dying, he said. I kept being too busy. She rode back toward Konoha. Behind her, she heard him go back to his paperwork. She didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. She settled on both, which had been her default mode since taking the hat anyway. Iruka arrived at the harbor an hour after Tsunade left. He came alone, on foot, without announcing himself to anyone, which was either brave or thoughtless depending on how you looked at the 9 warships in the harbor. He walked down the dock in his academy teacher's vest, the same one he'd been wearing for 6 years with the same grade report ink stain on the left cuff that he'd apparently given up on removing. Naruto saw him from the deck of the Uzumaki and stopped talking mid-sentence to Bell. Bell looked at what Naruto was looking at. You know him? Yeah, Naruto said. He was already moving to the gangplank. He came down it and onto the dock, and Iruka stopped walking when he came off the gangplank, and they stood 10 feet apart on salt gray dock wood with 9 warships and 6 years and a crown between them. Iruka looked older. Not old, he wasn't 30 yet, but older in the way that years with weight to them showed differently than years without. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was looking at Naruto with an expression that wasn't quite any of the standard expressions, that lived in a complicated territory between several of them at once. You wrote that you built something, Iruka said. Yeah. You didn't mention it was, he gestured broadly at the fleet, the warships, the 400 crew members visible on various decks going about their work, the flag snapping overhead, this. I didn't want to oversell it in the letter. Naruto paused. Or undersell it. I wasn't sure which. Iruka looked at him. You were 10 years old when you disappeared. I know. I looked for you. His voice was even. Not accusatory. Factual, the way people stated facts they'd been carrying long enough to have stopped being emotional about in the conventional sense. For 3 months. Every day after class. Naruto was quiet for a moment. I didn't know that. The rift wouldn't open from this side. I couldn't, Iruka stopped. Collected himself with the specific efficiency of someone who had decided to be composed about this and was successfully being composed while visibly finding it difficult. The search was closed after 6 months. Everyone else assumed, I know what they assumed. I didn't, Iruka said simply. Naruto looked at him for a long moment. The dock sounds continued around them, water, rope, the distant shout of a crew member, the creak of a moored ship. The world going about itself. I kept coming back to write the letter, Naruto said. Not the letter I sent, just thinking about it. What I'd say. Whether it would reach. It did. I know. That's why I'm here. He reached into his jacket and pulled something out. The folded homework. 6-year-old paper, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded too many times, the ink slightly faded but legible. He held it out. You didn't ask for this. Iruka looked at it. He recognized it, Naruto could see that, the small shift of expression that came with recognition of something specific rather than general. He took it. Opened it. Read it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up, and his expression had given up on being composed, and he said, Naruto. Yeah. I'm sorry. I know, Naruto said. And then, because it was true and because true things were the only things worth saying in moments like this, it's okay. Iruka pressed his lips together. Nodded once, twice, the rapid nod of someone trying to communicate while their voice wasn't fully available. He folded the homework back up and tucked it into his vest, and Naruto recognized the gesture because it was exactly the one he'd used with the letter for 2 years before sending it. "Are you staying?" Iruka asked. "I'm staying. Not forever, my sovereignty needs me. But Konoha is home." "It was always home, even when it wasn't," he stopped. "Tried again. Even when it didn't act like it." "The village has changed," Iruka said. Some of it," Naruto agreed. "I know about the parts that haven't." Iruka looked at the crown. "Is that real?" Naruto touched the brim. "Very. Where did you get a crown?" "Found it at the bottom of a mystery island in a world-ending treasure chest after a 2-year search across a sea that wanted to kill me every other Tuesday." Iruka stared at him. "I'll tell you the whole thing over ramen," Naruto said. "Tomorrow. If Tuchi's still, he's still there. He asks about you." Iruka paused. "The sign's been gone for 4 years." Something settled in Naruto's chest. Quietly. "Good," he said. They walked back up the dock together, and Bell watched them go with the expression of someone who hadn't expected to feel anything today and was mildly annoyed at himself for feeling something. He rode into Konoha the next morning. Not subtly. Not quietly. He came with 12 of his crew as escort, not because he needed protection but because arriving alone was a choice that implied he was presenting himself for the village's assessment, and that wasn't the nature of this visit. He came on horseback, with the Uzumaki flag on the standard his crew carried, and he wore the crown, and he came through the main gate at a pace that said, "I have time, I am not hurried, I am not asking permission." The gate Chunin, different ones than the woman from 6 years ago, opened without challenge, because Tsunade had clearly passed word, but their eyes followed the procession with the specific combination of protocol and stunned curiosity that people managed when following orders they couldn't quite believe were the right ones. The village was already awake. It was that kind of morning. Word had traveled in the 6 hours since Naruto arrived in Naminato, and Konoha, for all its shinobi discipline, was still a place where people looked out of windows when something interesting happened. And 12 crew members with naval weapons and orange and red livery riding behind a 16-year-old in a crown was, objectively, interesting. Naruto looked at the village as he rode through it. Saw how it had changed and where it hadn't. The ramen stand, no sign. The academy, same building, same window configuration, one of the windows broken and patched with oilcloth. The Hokage monument, the 4 stone faces looking down with their usual expression of serious stone. He looked at the 4th face for longer than the others, and felt something that he didn't try to name because naming it would have made it smaller. The council building was large and serious looking. It had been built to look large and serious, and the effort showed. Tsunade was waiting inside. So was her council, the standard civilian and shinobi advisors, a collection of faces Naruto didn't know personally but recognized from the file Robin had assembled. And at the far end of the table, with the specific stillness of someone who had been waiting patiently for something to arrive so they could begin dealing with it, was Danzo Shimura. He was older than Naruto had expected from the file. Not elderly, still sharp, still contained, the bandaged arm and covered eye giving him the look of something that had been repaired and reinforced multiple times. His one visible eye found Naruto immediately, and what was in it was the thing Naruto had been expecting, not surprise, because Danzo had clearly been prepared for this, but calculation. The kind that didn't stop. Naruto sat at the table. He didn't wait to be invited. He chose a chair roughly equidistant between Tsunade and Danzo, which placed him geometrically in the conversation and not subordinate to either end. He set one hand flat on the table and looked around at the assembled council with the patient attention he developed for rooms full of people who were trying to decide what he was before they decided what to do about him. Emperor Uzumaki, Tsunade began, with the light emphasis on the title that said she decided to acknowledge it rather than work around it, which was the smart move. Hokage-sama. He nodded. Looked at the council. I'll keep this short because I know you have questions and I'd rather answer them than let them grow. He looked at Danzo as he said the last part. The Uzumaki sovereignty is a recognized political entity under maritime law, currently comprising 31 islands, 6 active warships, and a treasury that as of last week sits at approximately 9 billion berries and growing. We have an alliance with the Whitebeard pirates and active trade relationships with 14 other sovereign entities. He paused. I'm here because Konoha is my home. Not to submit to its authority. To be present in it as what I am. The civilian council advisor on Tsunade's left, a thin man named Hamura who had the expression of someone whose entire career had been built on the premise that things could be categorized and managed, said, the sovereignty you describe doesn't appear in any existing treaty framework, correct, Naruto said. It predates several of them. Robin can walk you through the legal lineage if you want, she's outside and she has documents. The fleet in Naminato, said another council member. 9 warships anchored in our territorial, in a harbor they're paying berth fees for, Naruto said. Receipts available. Danzo had not spoken. He was watching, and Naruto was watching him watching, and the room had the specific quality of a space where 2 people were having a second conversation entirely below the surface of the official one. Then Danzo spoke. His voice was dry and measured and gave away nothing it wasn't choosing to give away. You've been gone 6 years. A child who fell through a spatial anomaly into what appears to be an alternate dimension. He folded his hands on the table. And in 6 years you've accumulated enough power and resources to arrive at our doorstep with a fleet. That's an extraordinary story. Yes, Naruto said. And you expect us to simply accept the legitimacy of your sovereignty. The crown. The treaties. All of it. I don't expect anything, Naruto said. I'm informing you. There's a difference. He held Danzo's gaze. I know about Root. I know about the operatives you sent through the rift. He paused, and let the pause do its work. I know about a lot of things. Robin keeps excellent records. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, none of the other council members reacted visibly except Hamura, who went slightly still. Danzo's expression didn't change, which was itself a form of change, because a man who heard something he already knew didn't need to react, and a man who heard something that threatened him and chose not to react was broadcasting his awareness of the threat as clearly as if he'd stood up. Records are subject to interpretation, Danzo said. These ones are very clear, Naruto said pleasantly. Tsunade looked between them with the specific expression of someone watching a pressure dynamic that she recognized and was deciding when to interrupt. She let it run another 3 seconds, then, the Uzumaki sovereignty's presence in the Land of Fire's harbor is temporarily authorized under the same guest state provisions we'd extend to any foreign dignitary. She looked at Naruto. Naruto. You are also, whatever else you are, a Konoha citizen by birth. That comes with obligations. I know. I also know it comes with protections. He looked around the table. I'm not here as a threat. I'm here as someone who grew up in this village and intends to make sure it's safe. Whether the village decides to cooperate with that or work against it is, genuinely, up to you. He stood. The meeting, he decided, was over. I'll be in the village for 2 weeks. I'm available for official discussion. Robin has my schedule. He looked at Tsunade. Thank you for seeing me. He walked to the door. Opened it. Paused with his hand on the frame, back to the room, and said, Danzo. Root's activities in my sovereignty stop today. Not loudly. Conversationally. The tone of someone stating a thing that was already decided. The next operative who comes through that rift on your orders doesn't go into the ocean. I send them back with a message. You won't like the message. He walked out. It was 3 hours later, in the afternoon light of a Konoha he was relearning the geography of from the inside, that Sasuke found him. Or rather, Naruto found him, because Sasuke was in the training ground they'd both used as academy students and Naruto had gone there more out of muscle memory than intention, walking the village the way you walked a place you needed to relearn at the level of the body rather than the map. Sasuke was running kata alone, as he'd apparently been for years. The training ground showed the marks of sustained solo practice, the specific pattern of someone who came here regularly and worked until they were empty and then came back and did it again. He was good. Naruto watched him from the tree line for 30 seconds and recognized immediately that 6 years of training had done significant work. The Sharingan's precision, the fire affinity techniques that had always been his strongest, the physical conditioning that had the deliberate quality of someone chasing something just ahead of them. He also recognized that Sasuke hadn't heard him approach. Which was interesting. "You're dropping your right shoulder when you set for the third stance," Naruto said. Sasuke stopped mid-movement. Every muscle in his back went tight. He turned slowly and looked at Naruto with an expression that Naruto spent a few seconds categorizing and arrived at: complicated. Several things occupying the same face simultaneously, none of them winning. "Uzumaki," he said finally. "Sasuke." Sasuke looked at the crown. Back at Naruto's face. "You look different. 6 years'll do that." "Where were you?" "Different world. Whole thing. I'll explain later." Naruto walked into the training ground and stopped a few meters away. "You look like you've been training angry." Sasuke's eyes sharpened. "Don't. I'm not criticizing. I'm observing." Naruto tilted his head. "What are you chasing?" "That's none of your, is it, Itachi?" The name landed like a stone in still water. Sasuke's expression did something sharp and complicated and briefly unguarded in a way that it immediately tried to close back over. "Don't say that name like you know, I don't know everything," Naruto said. "I know you were spiraling when I left. I know that without someone to push against you push against yourself instead, which is efficient but it'll break something eventually." He looked at Sasuke levelly. "I'm back now." Sasuke stared at him. "You're back," he repeated. Like he was checking the words for a trap. "Yeah. With a fleet. And a crown. And," he gestured broadly, "an entire empire apparently, from what I heard in the market 20 minutes after everyone started talking about it." "Yeah. And you just walked into a council meeting and told Danzo to his face." Sasuke had apparently heard very specific details from somewhere, "that you know about Root." "Also yeah." A long pause. Sasuke looked at the ground, then back at Naruto. Something moved through his expression that Naruto recognized as the specific internal negotiation someone ran when they'd been alone long enough that even connection that complicated them felt like relief. "You're an idiot," Sasuke said. "You've been saying that since we were 7. I've been right since we were 7. Naruto grinned. It was the real grin, the one that didn't require anything from the person receiving it. "Come spar with me. I want to see what you've actually got." Sasuke looked at him. "You think I won't?" "I think you want to see what I've got," Naruto said. Which is basically the same thing. It was Sasuke's turn to almost smile. Almost. He pulled his hands from his pockets. "Fine. But if that crown falls off because I hit you in the head, that's your fault." "The crown doesn't fall off," Naruto said. "It stays." Sasuke looked at him for a second, then looked at the crown, and the almost smile did something complicated. "Of course it does." They squared off. The training ground went quiet in the specific way it went quiet when two people who had been oriented around each other's existence for most of their lives found that orientation again after a long absence, not comfortable quiet, the charged kind, the kind that meant things were about to happen at speed. Sasuke moved first. Always had. What followed was 22 minutes of the most honest communication either of them had managed in years, conducted entirely without words. Sasuke was fast. Genuinely fast, faster than the Sasuke Naruto remembered, faster in the systematic way that deliberate training produced. The Sharingan opened after the second exchange, and Naruto felt the tracking quality of it, the way it read and predicted and adjusted in real time, and he pushed his own speed up to match and found that Sasuke kept pace and then pushed further himself, and they cycled up together through the registers of what they could do until both of them were moving at a pace that would have been impossible for the 10-year-olds who'd last occupied this training ground. Naruto didn't use the full Sage Shift. Not because he was hiding it, he just didn't need it, and he wanted to meet Sasuke at the level Sasuke was actually at, because anything else would have been talking past the point. When Sasuke landed a solid hit to Naruto's guard, a real one, clean and hard, the kind that told you something, Naruto skidded back 3 feet and looked at him with genuine satisfaction. Good. Sasuke was breathing hard. He looked at Naruto the way he'd looked at problems his whole life, like the existence of something harder than he'd prepared for was the most useful piece of information he'd received in a while. "You're better," he said. Not as a compliment. As a fact. Yeah. How much better? Naruto considered. More than I showed just now. Sasuke's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in the specific expression he wore when he was cataloging a gap and measuring it. I need to know how you got there. That's a long conversation. I'm not busy. He looked at Naruto with the directness that had always been his best quality and his most abrasive one. You left. He stopped. Restarted, without the emotion that had started to surface and that he clearly wasn't ready to address head-on. You were the only one in this village who was worth, he stopped again. Naruto let him stop. Didn't fill the silence. I need to know how you got there, Sasuke said again, and the third iteration of it was quieter, and the quiet made it clear what it actually meant. Yeah, Naruto said. Okay. Come to the ship tonight. I'll have Juro cook. Robin can tell you about the poneglyphs if you want, she'll appreciate someone actually asking questions about them. He paused. And I'll tell you about the fruit. And the sea. And the crown. Sasuke looked at him for a long moment. The fruit. You're going to like the fruit part, Naruto said. Or you're going to be annoyed by it. Those are basically the same reaction for you. The corner of Sasuke's mouth moved. It was almost imperceptible and absolutely real. Fine, he said. Tonight. Route moved at 2 in the morning. Naruto had known they would. Not hoped, known, the way you knew things when you'd spent 6 years learning how organizations that operated in the dark moved in the moments right after you turned a light on near them. You didn't expose something in a room full of witnesses without that thing moving the second the room emptied. He'd told Bell. Bell had told Mako. Mako had arranged the crew in a way that looked like normal overnight watch rotation and was actually a mesh of coverage that left no gap on the ships or the dock. The route operatives came in over the seawall, 4 of them, wearing the blank-masked uniforms that were specifically designed to make the wearer look like a problem with no face. They moved with genuine skill. Clean silent footwork, good spacing, the kind of tactical discipline that came from serious training under demanding oversight. They were almost to the Uzumaki's gangplank when Bell dropped from the mast above them. All 400 pounds of Bell, from 20 feet, landing in the middle of their formation with the structural authority of someone who had spent his entire career understanding load-bearing. The formation broke. 3 of the 4 responded immediately, good response time, and the 4th went under Bell and stayed there. The 3 who responded found Naruto standing on the gangplank with his hands in his jacket pockets, the crown on, looking at them with the patient expression of someone who had been waiting and had things to do afterward. Danzo send you, he said. The 3 masks looked at each other. Training instilled silence. Training also didn't account for Naruto's shadow clones appearing from the Tsubaki's lower deck hatches to flank the dock, or for Robin's arms blooming from the dock planks to pin 6 collective limbs in a movement that was quiet and comprehensive and took about 2 seconds. The operative nearest Naruto, the senior one, he could read it in how the other 2 oriented toward them, reached slowly for a weapon. Don't, Naruto said. The next step after that is one I don't want to take, and from what I understand about Root, you were good people before you were Danzo's people, which means you're better than what you're doing right now. The hand stopped. Here's the message, Naruto said. He reached into his jacket and produced a scroll, written, sealed, addressed. He held it out to the senior operative, who took it after a moment with the careful motion of someone making a calculation about what a scroll from an emperor meant. Read it. Don't read it. Give it to Danzo. You were never here. I don't need to escalate this. He looked at them steadily. But if there's a fifth attempt, I stop sending messages. He walked past them, back up the gangplank, and went to bed. In the morning, the scroll was gone. Robin, eating breakfast in the main cabin with a cup of coffee and 3 books open, looked up when he came in. How many? 4. No casualties. He poured himself tea. The message was delivered. She nodded. Went back to her book. Then, without looking up, Danzo will escalate. I know. The scroll won't be enough. It was never about being enough, Naruto said. It was about what comes after it. He escalates, we respond, and his response becomes the public record. He sat down. Robin. How much do we have on him? She looked up. Enough, she said. Not as an estimate. As a conclusion. Good. He picked up his tea. Then we wait for him to move. The thing about Danzo Shimura, Naruto had decided from Robin's files, was that he genuinely believed in what he was doing. That was the part that made him different from a simple power-hungry man. He believed that Konoha's survival required the kind of ruthlessness that formal structures couldn't authorize, that someone had to be willing to do the dark things so the light structures could pretend they didn't exist. He believed, in the specific way that ideologues believed things, that he was the cost Konoha paid for its existence. That made him dangerous in a way that simple ambition didn't. Simple ambition you could redirect. True belief was a different animal. The scroll arrived at Root's base, wherever that was. Robin's intelligence had 3 possible locations, and Danzo read it, and whatever was in it, he made his decision within the hour. By 10 in the morning, Naruto had 3 separate intelligence intercepts from his network suggesting that Danzo had begun reaching out to external contacts. Not within Konoha. Outside. The other great nations. Specific individuals in the Fire Daimyo's court. The message being delivered, as far as Robin could reconstruct from fragments, that the arrival of the Uzumaki fleet represented a foreign power establishing a foothold in Land of Fire territory, and that the other nations should consider the precedent carefully. Naruto was eating breakfast with Irika at Tuchi's ramen stand when Robin sent the report. He read it, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Irika watched him. Problem. Expected problem. Naruto picked up his chopsticks again. Danzo's going to try to make the other nations nervous about my fleet being here. Is it working? Probably already sent by the time I got the report. He ate. But it's fine. It's fine, Irika repeated, in the tone of a teacher who has heard students describe catastrophic situations as fine before and retained skepticism. The other nations being nervous is the opening I need, Naruto said. Danzo thinks he's building pressure on me. What he's actually doing is justifying why I need to call a summit. He finished a section of noodles. And a summit on my flagship, on my terms, in front of everyone. He stopped. Glanced at Irika. This is boring. I'll explain the plan later. No, Irika paused. Actually, yes, it is a little over my head. Naruto grinned. Eat your ramen. They ate their ramen. The village moved around them, morning ordinary. Someone's kid ran past the stand. A pair of Chunin argued about a mission report 2 tables away. The same street, the same sounds, almost the same as the memory of it. Almost. Better. Naruto ate his ramen and felt the crown on his head, warm and present, and thought, this is what I came back for. Not the politics. Not the summit. this. He'd deal with Danzo. He was going to deal with Danzo, thoroughly and finally and in the specific way that left no room for a follow-up. But right now there was ramen and Irika across the table, and the morning sun was hitting the stand's awning in a way that made everything inside it golden. He took another bite. Chapter 5, Emperor's Peace. The summit invitation went out on a Wednesday. Not through diplomatic courier, not through the standard shinobi messaging system, not through any channel that the recipients could screen or delay or quietly bury in bureaucratic procedure. Robin had designed the delivery specifically for that, 12 separate couriers, each carrying an original sealed copy, each with instructions to deliver directly to the relevant leader's hand and obtain a witnessed confirmation of receipt before departing. The invitations were addressed to the Hokage of Konoha, the Reikage of Kumo, the Mizukage of Kiri, the Tsuchikage of Iwa, the Kazekage of Suna, and to the Fire Daimyo's court as a matter of courtesy. They were written on Uzumaki sovereignty stationery, the crown watermark, the spiral seal, and the language was Robin's, which meant it was precise in the way that a blade was precise, nothing extra, nothing missing, each word load-bearing. The letter said, "The Uzumaki sovereignty formally requests the attendance of the above parties at a summit of mutual interest, to be held aboard the flagship Uzumaki, anchored in the port of Naminato, Land of Fire. The agenda concerns trade security, Poneglyph historical record access, and several matters of regional stability that have recently been brought to the sovereignty's attention. Food will be provided. Date and time, 3 days hence, midday." The last line was Naruto's addition. Robin had looked at it and said, "Food will be provided" is not typically included in international summit invitations. Naruto had said, "Then they'll remember this one." She'd left it in. Danzo received the copy addressed to Tsunade's council 6 hours before the others, because Konoha's copy was hand-delivered by Naruto personally to Tsunade's office with the specific timing of someone ensuring that the host nation knew before their guests. Tsunade had read it, set it down, and said, "You're holding the summit on your ship." "Neutral ground," Naruto said. "It's your ship." "It's floating between all of them," Naruto said. "Nobody's territory. My ship is the closest thing to a truly neutral location in this region." He paused. "Also, if anyone tries anything, it's my ship, which helps." She'd looked at him for a long moment. "You have something on Danzo." "Robin has something on Danzo," Naruto said. "I have Robin." Tsunade had been quiet. "Then, he's been part of this village for 40 years. The people who know what he is have never been able to, because they were inside the system he operated in," Naruto said. "I'm outside it. Everything he did in the assumption that the information would stay inside a structure he helped build. Robin found it from the outside and it looks very different from out there." Tsunade had looked out the window at the village. At the street below, ordinary and morning-lit. Then back at him. "Don't destroy the village doing this." "I'm not here to destroy anything," he said. "I'm here to fix it." He paused. "That includes him. There's a version of this that ends without the village being torn apart publicly. I'd like to find that version. And if he doesn't cooperate?" Naruto had looked at her steadily. "Then the public version." She'd nodded, slowly. 3 days. 3 days, he confirmed. The 2 days before the summit had the specific compressed quality of time that was moving fast because too much was happening in it. Sasuke came to the ship the first night, as agreed, and Robin had apparently decided that a thorough explanation of the poneglyphs was what the evening called for, and Sasuke had asked precise and genuinely good questions for 2 hours while Juro fed everyone with the dedication of a man who believed that important conversations happened better when people were full. Naruto watched Sasuke in those 2 hours, the gradual shift from defensive attention to actual engagement, the moment where the questions became less interrogative and more curious, where he stopped being a guest testing his environment and became a person actually interested in something. After Robin went to review her summit documents and Juro disappeared back into his galley, Naruto and Sasuke sat on the stern deck with the harbor lights on the water and Sasuke said, without looking at him, "Itachi is in Akatsuki." "I know. You know about Akatsuki. I know about most things. Robin is thorough. Naruto looked at the water. I know about the Uchiha massacre. The real version. Sasuke's jaw tightened. His hands on the railing went still. Then you know, that he was ordered to, Naruto said quietly. That Danzo was involved in that order. That Itachi has been living inside a mission that destroyed him so that Konoha could pretend it didn't happen. He felt Sasuke go completely still beside him. I know. For a long time there was only the harbor. Water moving against hulls. A distant crewman's voice, some mundane task on the foredeck. He's not a villain, Sasuke said. It came out with the specific weight of someone saying a thing they'd been fighting the shape of for years. I know he isn't. Everyone in this village, I know. Naruto turned to look at him. That's another thing we're fixing. Not at the summit is about Danzo's current operations. But after. The Uchiha story gets told correctly. Sasuke looked at him. His expression was raw in the specific way that things were raw when they'd been contained long enough that even partial release felt violent. I can't guarantee anything, Naruto said. But I can make it very loud and very public and very documented. Which is what Robin is good at and why she's been in my corner for 2 years. He held Sasuke's gaze. You're not doing this alone anymore. I'm back. Sasuke looked at him for a long time. The Sharingan wasn't active, just dark eyes and the expression underneath them, which was the one Sasuke almost never let show because showing it required believing that what you showed would be treated carefully. You're going to get yourself killed, Sasuke said. People keep saying that, Naruto said. I keep not dying. It's becoming a whole thing. The corner of Sasuke's mouth moved. Idiot. Emperor, Naruto corrected. Idiot Emperor. That's better. They sat on the stern deck until well past midnight, and it wasn't uncomfortable, and it didn't need to be anything other than what it was. The morning of the summit, Mako woke Naruto at 5. Not because there was a crisis, because Mako had learned over 2 years that Naruto operated better on days that mattered when he had time in the morning to simply exist before the day required things of him. She brought tea, left it on his desk, and went back to her charts. He sat at the desk and drank the tea and looked out the porthole at the pre-dawn harbor. The water was flat and dark. His fleet sat at anchor in the harbor in formation, 6 warships and the Uzumaki, their flags hanging in the still air. The Tsubaki was there too, overhauled now almost beyond recognition by Bell's sustained attention, sitting at the edge of the formation like a reminder of where all of it had started. He thought about the clearing. The bad day. The kunai marks on the trees and the homework in his jacket. The wobble in the air that he'd poked with one finger. He thought about what the question in the Raftel chamber had felt like. What will you do with it? He'd said protect it. Protect whatever and whoever needed it. He'd meant it when he said it and he meant it now, but the years between had made it more specific, more weighted. Protect wasn't passive. Protect meant this, sitting here before dawn on the day he was going to dismantle a man who had been a hidden rot in a village for 40 years, doing it not through violence but through the specific kind of power that Robin had built out of documents and careful thought and the understanding that some things needed to be exposed rather than beaten. He put the crown on. Drank the rest of his tea. Kurama, behind his ribs, was calm. The deep-settled calm of something enormous that had decided it was exactly where it needed to be. Ready? Not in words. In that shape of meaning language they'd been speaking for years. Naruto set the cup down. Yeah. They came. That was the thing, they all came. Naruto had expected at least one refusal, one nation using the short notice as an excuse to send a proxy, but every leader came personally. He thought about it afterward and decided it wasn't because of him specifically. It was because the invitation had reached them shortly after Danzo's communication suggesting the fleet was a threat to regional stability, and every leader present was smart enough to know that in situations like that you came and looked with your own eyes rather than making decisions from someone else's description. The Reikage arrived first, because they had the energy of someone for whom arriving first was a competitive act. He came with 2 guards and a specific expression that said he had already formed 7 opinions about this situation and was prepared to defend all of them simultaneously. He was a large man with a physical presence that filled the Uzumaki's main deck meeting room in a way that suggested the room was aware of him. He looked at Naruto when introduced and said, "You're 16. That's the second most common thing people say to me," Naruto said. "What's the first? Where did you come from?" "I studied him." "Fair enough." He sat. The Mizukage, Mei Terumi, whose reputation Robin had summarized as capable, pragmatic, and significantly underestimated by everyone who had underestimated her, arrived second and looked at the Uzumaki with a professional's eye for naval construction before she looked at anything else. She told Bell when she passed him on the gangplank that the bow reinforcement was excellent work. Bell said thank you without looking up from his rivet, because Bell didn't perform deference to titles. The Tsuchikage, Anoki, arrived third and looked like he hadn't decided whether to be indignant or curious and was doing both at once. He was old and small and had the specific energy of someone who had been underestimated by virtue of size his entire life and had a detailed memory of every instance. He looked at Naruto with immediate sharp attention, the kind that evaluated rather than dismissed. The Kazekage of Suna sent his son, a red-haired young man named Gaara whose eyes were Naruto's age exactly and held something very specific in them, a quality Naruto recognized from mirrors, in the years before the Grand Line had changed what he saw there. Something hollowed out and heavily armored over. He looked at Naruto's crown and then at Naruto's face and something moved in his expression that he locked down immediately. Naruto made a note to talk to him separately. Later. Tsunade arrived with her advisors. Danzo arrived with her, which was exactly what Naruto had expected, because a man of Danzo's instincts knew that the worst position was outside the room when things were being decided inside it. Juro served tea before anyone spoke. It was the right tea for the room, good enough to communicate that care had been taken, not elaborate enough to be a performance. Robin had specified it. Juro had executed it without comment. Naruto stood at the head of the table. Not because it was the head, the table was round, which Robin had specified for exactly that reason, but because he stood rather than sat, which had a different quality. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'll be direct, which I know isn't always how summits work, but I think everyone in this room prefers it." He looked around the table. "The Uzumaki sovereignty is real, legally recognized, and not going away. I'm not here to ask permission for it to exist. I'm here to propose a formal treaty that defines our relationship so that nobody has to make guesses about it." He paused. "That's the part of this meeting I expect will take time and negotiation, and Robin has draft language ready when we get there." He reached down and set a sealed document case on the table. It sat there while he continued. "The other part of this meeting is shorter." He looked at Danzo. 4 days ago, you sent operatives to sabotage vessels belonging to the Uzumaki sovereignty while they were anchored in a legally registered berth in the Land of Fire. The night before that, you began reaching out to the nations represented in this room suggesting that my fleet constitutes a destabilizing foreign presence. He opened the case. This is the documentation of both. And this, a second folder, is a broader account of Root's operational history, including its involvement in events that the nations at this table have a direct interest in knowing about. He set both folders in the center of the table. The room was very quiet. "I'm not here to make accusations," Naruto said. "Robin built this from sources and records, it speaks for itself. I'm putting it on the table because these nations deserve to know what has been done in the name of Konoha's security without Konoha's leadership being fully informed." He looked at Tsunade. "Including the Hokage." Tsunade's expression was controlled and sharp and looking at Danzo. Danzo had gone very still. I said, "What's in the broader account?" Root's operations in Kumo over the last decade, Naruto said. Including a document theft operation that Kumo was blamed for that Root actually conducted. A's expression made a specific journey. Put that in front of me. It's in the folder. Section 3. The Mizukage said, Kiri. Section 5, Robin said from her position at Naruto's right. Her voice was even and precise, the voice she used when she was presenting information she had absolute confidence in. Specifically, a Root conducted assassination of a diplomatic emissary 12 years ago that was attributed to Kiri agents and contributed to the deterioration of the Kiri-Konoha relationship from, we know when it deteriorated, May said. She was reading Section 5 and her expression was doing something cold and very focused. Inoki said nothing. He was reading his section, Section 2, which Naruto had been told by Robin was the one that required the most diplomatic handling because the Tsuchikage's pride was structural, and his face was an old man's face doing the specific thing old men's faces did when they encountered evidence that the world was even worse than they'd been willing to believe. Gaara was watching Naruto instead of reading. He would read later, Naruto could see that calculation too, but right now he was watching the person who had put this in the center of a table and said look. Danzo said, this documentation is verified, Robin said. I'm happy to walk through the verification methodology if anyone has specific questions. I have the source chain for each document, the cross-reference records, and in 3 cases physical artifacts that corroborate the written record. Who are you? A said to Robin. Nico Robin. Chief advisor to Emperor Uzumaki, historical scholar, and the only person in this room who can read the poneglyphs. She looked at him. Section 7 in your folder is the poneglyph reference to Kumo's historical territorial claim, which has been disputed for 60 years and which I can now settle definitively if you'd like. I looked at the folder. Back at Robin. Back at the folder. I'll need some time with Section 7, he said. Of course. Danzo said, in the measured voice that hadn't lost its control, the Hokage hasn't authorized, the Hokage, Tsunade said, and her voice was the specific temperature of something that had been cold for a long time and was finished being cold, is reading Section 1, which concerns a directive issued 7 years ago without her knowledge or authorization, and I would appreciate silence while I do that. The silence was comprehensive. An hour in, the nature of the room had shifted. Not dramatically, Naruto had not expected dramatic. He'd expected the gradual change that happened when information settled into people who were intelligent enough to integrate it and experienced enough to understand what it meant. The anger in the room was real, but it was the productive kind, the kind that looked for causes and consequences rather than just outlets. Danzo had not broken. He was too old and too disciplined for that. But he had contracted. The specific shrinkage that happened when the space a person occupied was defined by the assumptions they operated on, and those assumptions were methodically removed. He was smaller than he'd been when he walked in. Not physically. In the room. He looked at Naruto across the table and said, very quietly, you've been planning this since you arrived. I've been planning this since Robin finished the files 2 months ago, Naruto said. The summit gave everyone a reason to be in the same room. You used my own move against me, Danzo said. I reached out to the nations, and you used the fact that they were already thinking about your presence as the reason to call them here. Yes. A long pause. That's well played, Danzo said. It wasn't concession. It was professional acknowledgement, the kind that preceded a different move. I know what you're going to say next, Naruto said. You're going to say that Root's operations, whatever their methods, produced results that kept Konoha safe in ways the legitimate structure couldn't. And you're right that they produced results. And you're right that some of those results protected Konoha. He held Danzo's gaze. But you also know that operations without oversight become operations for their own sake. You stopped doing this for Konoha a long time ago. You've been doing it for the idea of what you think Konoha should be, which is different, and that difference is in those folders. Danzo looked at him. Something moved in his one visible eye, not quite anger, not quite surprise, something that was the specific emotion of a person hearing a true thing said about them by someone they'd expected to need fighting. "You're 16 years old," he said. Not the way others said it. The way someone said it when they were genuinely working to understand how the situation had arrived at this. "I know," Naruto said. "The world gave me 6 years of serious education. I'm sorry if the timing is inconvenient." Anoki made a sound. It was, unmistakably, a suppressed laugh. A was reading section 7, pen in hand, making notes. Mei was looking at Danzo with the specific expression of someone who had found the source of a problem and was deciding which tool to use on it. Tsunade set her folder down. She looked at Danzo for a long moment. Then she said, quietly and without theater, "Danzo. Root is disbanded. Today." She looked at him steadily. "You have served this village your entire life, and some of that service was real, and I'm not erasing that. But this ends today." Danzo looked at her. Then at the room. Then, for a long moment, at the folders on the table in front of him. He nodded once. It was not defeat. It was the acknowledgement of a man who had spent his life believing that the ends justified the means, finally arriving at an end that had been built by the means he'd never thought would be turned against him. There was something almost tired about it, the specific tiredness of a very long fight. Naruto looked at him and felt, unexpectedly, something that wasn't triumph. Something closer to the feeling he'd had on the Raftel Island, holding the crown, the weight of consequence, the gravity of things that mattered. Danzo was not a simple villain. He was a man who had loved something the wrong way for too long. That didn't excuse anything. But it was real. He let the silence sit for a few seconds. Then, the treaty. Robin opened her document case. "Draft language for a multi-party trade and security agreement between the Uzumaki sovereignty and the Great Hidden Village nations," she said. "Key provisions, read it to us," A said. He had put down section 7 and was watching Robin with the specific attention of someone who had decided to pay attention. From the beginning. Robin read it. It took 40 minutes. She answered questions. Mei's were technical and precise, Anoki's were historical, A's were direct and practical, Gaara's were 2 questions, both of them unexpectedly perceptive. Tsunade asked about Konoha's specific position as the host nation for the fleet's current anchorage, and Robin had language for that too. Danzo sat and listened and said nothing. When Robin finished, A looked at Naruto. "The poneglyph information in our section. The historical territorial claim. It's yours," Naruto said. "Robin's translation is accurate and will provide certified copies. And in return, recognition of the sovereignty, and safe passage guarantees for our vessels in Kumo's territorial waters." Naruto paused. "And one other thing. Not in the treaty. Just a conversation I'd like to have." A studied him. "What conversation?" "About the real history of the Uchiha clan," Naruto said. "Not today. When the treaty is signed and there's time." He didn't look at Danzo. "There are things in Robin's files that touch every nation at this table and that the nations deserve to know. Including things that were done to Konoha citizens and blamed on others." The room processed that. Slowly, carefully. Gaara spoke for the second time. "How long have you been collecting this?" "Robin started 2 months before I left for Konoha. She's been building it for 2 years." Naruto looked at Gaara. "Why?" Gaara looked at him with those hollowed-out eyes that Naruto recognized from mirrors. "Because I want to know if there's anything in there about the Jinchuriki," Gaara said. Flat, careful, ready to receive almost anything. "Yes," Naruto said. Gaara nodded. "Once." The armor around his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Then I'd like to read it." "It's yours." Naruto looked at the table. "All of it is yours. That's the whole point, this is information that belongs to the world. Not to whoever had it first and decided not to share it. The treaty was signed in the late afternoon, as the harbor light went golden and the water in the port turned copper. Not all provisions were agreed immediately. They wanted to take the Poneglyph translation back to Kyumo for verification, which was reasonable, and Inoki reserved judgment on one specific trade corridor until he'd consulted his advisors, which was also reasonable. But the framework was signed. The recognition was real. Robin signed as the sovereignty's chief advisor, her signature clean and deliberate, and when the pen left the paper she held it for an extra second and set it down with a care that only Naruto saw. He knew what that meant. He'd watched her for 2 years. That was the look she wore when something she'd carried alone for a very long time was no longer only hers to carry. Afterward, as the leaders gathered their aides and the summit's formal energy began to dissipate into the more human energy of people who had been intense together for hours and were now just people on a ship, Naruto found Gaara standing at the stern railing looking at the harbor. He stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "The sand," Naruto said eventually, nodding toward the trace of it around Gaara's feet, the specific fine-grained kind that moved with him rather than falling still. "It's always there," Gaara said. "Mine is different. But I understand." Naruto looked at the water. "It gets easier. Not the thing inside you, that doesn't change. But the relationship with it does." Gaara looked at him. "You're carrying one. A nine-tailed fox, yeah." A pause. "And it doesn't, he hated me for years," Naruto said. "Now he's something else. I don't have a word for it. Something between a partner and a particularly difficult family member who you'd die for anyway." He paused. "It took time. And it took me being willing to actually talk to him instead of just trying to contain him." Gaara looked at his hands. The sand moved. "I've never tried that. It's terrifying at first." Naruto turned to look at him. "But you're not as alone in it as you think. And you deserve not to be alone in it." Something moved in Gaara's expression. Not dramatically, just a small seismic thing, the kind that didn't show on the surface but registered in what came after. "Thank you," he said. Quietly. "Come visit the sovereignty sometime," Naruto said. "Seriously. There are islands on the Grand Line that look like nothing you've ever seen. Robin can show you the historical records of the Sand Kingdoms." He paused. "Juro will make you the best food you've ever eaten and feel personally offended if you don't finish it." Gaara looked at him for a moment. "You are very strange," he said. "Yeah," Naruto agreed. "But strange works out. Usually." Danzo left the ship without fanfare, in the late afternoon, accompanied by 2 of Tsunade's Anbu rather than Root because Root was done. He walked down the gangplank with his cane and his bandages and his 40 years of a village that was complicated by his presence in it, and he looked smaller than he had that morning in a way that wasn't physical. Naruto was on the deck when he passed. He didn't stop Danzo. Didn't say anything. Danzo stopped himself, just briefly, at the top of the gangplank, and looked back. "You'll find it harder to run this than you think," Danzo said. Not as a threat. As something that might have been, genuinely, experience. Sovereignty is easier to declare than to maintain. People will come for it constantly. They'll never stop. "I know," Naruto said. "And you're not concerned." "I'm going to be busy," Naruto said. "That's not the same as concerned." Danzo looked at him for another moment. Then he walked down the gangplank. His steps were even and deliberate and carried the weight of someone who was going somewhere they'd already accepted arriving at. Naruto watched him go. Then he turned back to the harbor. The celebration was Juro's idea. It was always Juro's idea. He took over the Uzumaki's main deck at sunset and produced food from somewhere that shouldn't have been possible given the ship's galley dimensions. Robin suspected he had developed either a spatial relationship with kitchen space that defied standard geometry, or a network of supply contacts at every port that allowed him to preposition ingredients. He refused to explain either. Mako ate 3 plates and went back to her charts because Mako's relationship with celebration was that she celebrated by doing the thing she loved, which was navigation, and this was her form. Bell fixed something on the portside railing that had been fine but that he decided could be better, which was his form. Robin ate 1 plate and read a book, which was her form, but the book was closed more often than usual and she looked up at the harbor lights and the people and the food with the specific expression of someone who was still learning what it felt like to be somewhere safe. Naruto watched all of it and felt full in a way that food wasn't responsible for. Sasuke arrived unannounced from the dock, which meant he'd decided to come and then refused to acknowledge the decision formally by asking if he was welcome. He sat at the end of the table nearest the railing and ate without talking, and Juro fed him with the systematic care he applied to everyone, and Naruto caught Robin watching Sasuke with the specific analytical quality she wore when she was deciding whether to like someone. She asked him, over the second course, what he knew about the Uchiha clan's history before the founding of the hidden villages. Sasuke looked at her. Then at his food. Then at her again. Less than I should, he said. Considerably less, Robin said. The records I have go back 1100 years. The Uchiha architecture in the oldest documents is, she paused, calibrating, significantly more interesting than the village's official history suggests. Sasuke said, show me. She reached beside her plate for the folder she'd apparently brought to a celebration dinner because Robin brought documentation everywhere, and Sasuke leaned in, and within 4 minutes they were having a quiet, focused, intense conversation about pre-village clan structure that showed no signs of stopping. Naruto looked at them and felt something warm and specific. He stood, picked up his plate, and walked to the bow. The harbor was full of light from the fleet, their lights and the town lights behind them and the stars overhead, and the water held all of it in its patient dark way, reflecting without holding. He could see the Tsubaki at the fleet's edge, Bell's rebuilt version, the original red camellia name in fresh paint. 40 feet. Single-masted. The ship that had started everything. He thought about Shanks. He should find a way to let Shanks know, probably already knew, honestly, if the rumor networks were doing their job, and Shanks would have some large opinion about the crown and the empire and would express it at high volume. He thought about Rayleigh, old man with a dinghy, who had looked at Naruto like he was reading a letter someone else had written a very long time ago. He thought about Whitebeard, 12 seconds, and the laugh that had been a weather event. He thought about Kokoro in Logue Town, crying on a dock. About the fisherman's kid on Gecko's Rest who somehow knew he should know about the cave. About every island and every person in every storm that had been education before it was experience. He thought about the question in the Raftel chamber. What will you do with it? Protect it. And make it worth protecting. He looked at the village behind the harbor. The lights. The Hokage monument up on the cliff, the 4 stone faces looking at the sky in their serious stone way. His father's face up there, which he hadn't said out loud to anyone today and didn't need to. He'd known about the 4th Hokage for 2 years. Robin had found it in the files and brought it to him directly on a Tuesday morning with a cup of tea and said, "There's something you should know," in the tone she used for things that mattered. He'd sat with it for a week before it settled into something he could hold without it taking up all the space. It changed things. Not the way he'd expected, not in the direction of resentment. More in the direction of completion. A shape that had always had a gap in it, and now it didn't. He looked at the 4th face on the monument for a while. "I came back," he said to it. To the stone, to the memory, to the concept of a man he'd never met who had made the decision that had made him. "I came back and I fixed some things. There's more to fix. There's always more." He paused. "But I'm here. And he tried to find the right word, the accurate one, "I'm okay. Really okay. Not just saying it." The stone looked at the sky. The water moved. Behind him, he heard the celebration going on, Juro's voice raised in satisfaction about something, Mako's laugh from somewhere near the navigation deck, Robin and Sasuke's conversation still running, Bell's hammer against metal in the background like a metronome. He put one hand on the bow railing and felt the ship under him, his ship, his fleet, his people, his world, and the crown warm against his head, and Kurama settled behind his ribs like a tide that had decided to stay in. The next morning he went to the Hokage monument before the village woke. Not to the offices at the base of it. To the top, to the stone surface of the fourth face, where the wind came off the mountain and you could see the whole village spread out below and the forest beyond it, and on a clear morning the distant shimmer that might have been the coast. He sat on the fourth face's stone nose, a vandalism that would have gotten him 3 weeks of extra homework in the academy, and ate a container of ramen that Juro had packed for him without being asked, because Juro always knew. He was halfway through it when he heard someone climbing. Irika came over the edge of the stone nose, slightly out of breath, holding 2 cups of tea and looking at Naruto sitting there with ramen at sunrise with an expression that tried very hard to be stern about the monument and didn't succeed at all. He sat down beside Naruto on the stone nose without comment and handed him one of the cups. "How did you know I was here?" Naruto said. "You always came here when you needed to think," Irika said. "When you were 9, you used to sit on the Sandame's head and eat whatever you'd managed to steal from." He stopped. "Whatever you'd managed to acquire." "You knew," Naruto said. "I knew." Irika wrapped his hands around his cup. The morning light was coming up now, slow and golden, the village below them going from dark shapes to lit detail. "I should have done more about it." "You did what you could," Naruto said. "And then I left and you did more than you had to. Looking for me for 3 months." He ate a bite of ramen. "That matters more than you think." Irika was quiet for a while. "Where do you go from here?" "Back to the sovereignty for a while. There are 31 islands that need attention and 2 trade routes that Belle says need infrastructure, and Robin has about 6 more months of Poneglyph translation before she's finished the first complete record." He looked at the village. "And I need to talk to Tsunade about the Uchiha records. That's going to be its own process." "Sasuke?" Irika said carefully. "Sasuke's going to be fine." Naruto said it with the certainty of someone who had thought it through. "He needs the truth about Itachi, and then he needs something to do with his energy that isn't just chasing something terrible. The sovereignty has worked for someone who thinks like he does." He paused. "He hasn't agreed yet. But you think he will?" "I think he came to eat dinner on my ship without being invited, which means he already agreed and hasn't said so yet." Irika looked at him. "You've changed," he said. "Yeah. Not in the way that would have worried me. In the other way." Irika looked out at the village. "You're still you. Just, more of it." Naruto looked at him. Then down at the village, the streets waking up, the first smoke from cooking fires, the distant sound of a vendor doing early setup. The ramen stand's light was on. "Irika-sensei," he said. "Yes. Thank you. For the 3 months. And for coming to the clearing every week." He kept his voice even. "And for the homework." Irika's breath went a little unsteady. He covered it by drinking his tea. "You knew about that?" "I figured. Who else would come once a week at dawn?" He ate the last of his ramen. Held the container. "I'm going to keep coming back. Every time I can. This is still home." "I know," Irika said. "It's been waiting." They sat on the fourth stone face in the morning light, looking at the village below them, and the wind came off the mountain clean and cold, and the village woke up in its ordinary way, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 3 weeks later, the Uzumaki and its fleet sailed out of Naminato harbor on the morning tide, flags up and crew at stations and the water flat and silver under the early sky. On the dock, Irika watched them go. Sasuke stood 10 feet to his left, hands in his pockets, also watching. He was going to his own things for a while, there were truths to chase and records to correct and a brother's story to reclaim. But he knew which direction the flagship was sailing. On the Uzumaki's bow, Naruto stood with his hands on the railing and his face into the wind and the crown on his head, watching the coast grow smaller and the ocean grow larger, the way the horizon opened up ahead when you left harbor and the world expanded back to its real size. Beside him, Robin held her coffee with both hands and watched the same horizon with the eyes of someone who had spent 20 years running from the world and was finally moving through it on her own terms. Behind them both, Mako sang something under her breath over her charts. Jiro argued with the morning from the galley. Bell fixed something that wasn't broken yet, preventatively. Kurama settled into warmth behind Naruto's ribs, deep and steady, the warmth of something enormous that had decided, completely, finally, without reservation, to be on the right side of things. The sea opened. Naruto grinned, the real one, the unplanned one, the one that didn't cost anything because it came from somewhere that had stopped keeping accounts. Mako, he called. Her head appeared from behind the chart table. Already have it. I didn't even say where. East-southeast to the calm belt edge, then through the corridor to Uzushio Island. Then the infrastructure work Bell keeps threatening to start. She disappeared back behind the charts. You're predictable when you're happy. He laughed. Turned back to the ocean. It was enormous and wild and never the same twice, and it was his in every way that mattered, not owned, not controlled, but known, the way you knew something you'd lived inside long enough to understand how it breathed. He was 16 years old and an emperor and a shinobi's son and a Jinchuriki and a pirate and a sailor and a dozen other things that didn't cancel each other out. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Uzumaki cut through the water, flags flying orange and red, the spiral turning in the wind, and the sea opened ahead of them like a question that already knew its answer.